I'm doing great. How are you doing? We've got an unbelievable amount of stuff to talk about. I think. I hope there's enough time. I hope everybody's ready to stay up late.
I just took a double scoop of pre-workout, so I'm gonna be good to go. We're gonna go as late as we can.
Yeah, the kid. The bourbon tonight is Four Roses, so I'm set and I'm ready to go.
I got some Old Hickory bourbon, so I'm set too.
Nice. Yeah, I think it's gonna be a good one. We should have some good speakers in, and I see King's here. That's huge.
Yeah, I mean King's here, so it's definitely gonna be a good chat. I guess we can go ahead and kick it off. Like I said a couple minutes ago, I know we have a lot of people that are gonna find this chat. Had a lot of people turn on reminders for it, so it'll build up over here over the next couple minutes, but. We can go ahead and get started. And I kind of want to start off with uh, presenting like an overview of the case. So last night I posted a grand jury subpoena Georgia Tech, and one of the most common questions that I actually saw on that was, why is there a grand jury subpoena to Georgia Tech, or what's their role in this? So that's nobody's fault. The media is really not covering this at all. So if you're not in this chat every week, you probably don't know why Georgia Tech's involved in this at all. So I kind of want to start there. I'm just going to do like 2 or 3 minutes on it while the chat builds up, and then we'll kind of get into the filings, and that's kind of the meat and potatoes of tonight's chat, I think. Um, so as it relates to Georgia Tech, and I just want to give an overview of everybody here. So um, some of you may have heard of Rodney Joffe, and Rodney Joffe is a tech executive. He's an entrepreneur. He's started a couple dozen companies. He also has a kind of a shady history. I mean, he was involved in mail scams back in the late 1980s and early 1990s. Um, More recently, there was a story in the Wall Street Journal where he's involved with measurement systems with his longtime business partner Raymond Salino, where they were collecting data without the user's knowledge out of some apps in Google, and they were selling that data to the Department of Defense, and that company was called Measurement Systems. And they had a registration in Panama, which is pretty interesting too. But there's a whole host of entities tied to Rodney Joffe and Raymond Salino that are a little bit unusual. And one of the more commonly known ones is Global Resource Systems. And you might remember seeing a story that came out on Inauguration Day about a year ago, where the Department of Defense transferred, I think, 175 million IP addresses to this brand new startup company called Global Resource Systems. Well, that was started by Raymond Salino. As I said, that's Joffe's business partner, but it was actually uh, assisted in the registration process by Martin Janol, which is a lawyer that has very long-standing ties to Rodney Joffe. So it seems to indicate that Joffe might have some involvement there. Um, so that's kind of like a you know introduction into Joffe, and his role in this case comes in as Tech Executive One. So if you go back and read the Sussman indictment, he's referenced not by name but by Tech Executive One as somebody that was interfacing with the Clinton campaign. As it turns out, he's also interacting with Fusion GPS. He was actually asked. He's the one that asked Michael Sussman to go to the FBI with allegations, and later to go to the CIA with allegations that we're going to talk about tonight. And that's kind of like the whole premise of this case. But as it relates to Joffe, what we also learned in the original indictment of Michael Sussman is he had a couple researchers, and researcher one is Manos Antonakakis, I believe his name is how do you pronounce it, and he is a researcher at Georgia Tech, and he's got uh, longstanding ties with DARPA. He does a lot of work with DARPA, which is a research arm of the Department of Defense. And then researcher number two is David Dagan. Now, David Dagan, as we recently learned, has been granted full immunity from Special Counsel Durham. So he is fully cooperating, and we're going to talk about him tonight. And then you might remember, the nexus of all of this is somebody called Tea Leaves, which was April Lorenzen. She is originator one in the indictment. And she is supposedly the one that collected all this data. Now, a lot of people are also asking, like, what's DARPA's role in this? Like, how does this all fit together? So here's the very broad, quick overview. DARPA awards some contracts to Georgia Tech. And these contracts, there's a few of them that are out there. There's enhanced attribution and there's rhamnesia, which are pretty much one and the same. They're kind of interchangeable terms. Rhamnesia is maybe a little bit more of a specific program within the broader umbrella of enhanced attribution. And enhanced attribution is a program that was the brainchild of a gentleman named Angelos Karamitis. And that name is going to be really important as we get into things maybe tonight and certainly over the next couple months. So remember Angelos Karamitis. That's going to be an important name. And what these contracts were to provide some level of analysis for cyber threat actors out there and to analyze hacks. And to do that, they needed data. And Georgia Tech, once awarded these contracts, were going to purchase data. And they purchased data from Neustar. And that's where Rodney Joffe comes in. Neustar is one company that he was a powerful executive at. And they sold this data to Georgia Tech. And that's the whole premise of where Georgia Tech fits into this broader picture. Now, Michael Sussman was indicted because he lied to the FBI, allegedly, stating that he had no client. He was just bringing this data to them of his own free will. And as it turns out, Rodney Joffe just did a filing where he says, oh, actually, Michael Sussman was representing me, and that's why my claim to privilege is good. And that's kind of what we're going to get into. So over the last couple of weeks, we have John Durham filing a motion to compel documents that have been withheld. And they've been withheld by Fusion GPS. They've been withheld by Rodney Joffe. And the Clinton campaign is actually asserting privilege over these communications, even though they're not CC'd on anything that supposedly Rodney Joffe has been emailing. And what John Durham has done in his motion to compel for the first time is to outline a joint venture and to outline a conspiracy. Now, he's not alleging it's a criminal conspiracy, but there's multiple parties that are working towards a common goal. And that allows him to bring in evidence from these other parties like Fusion GPS and the Clinton campaign and Rodney Joffe. Because they're all working towards a common goal, their actions and their statements are going to be material to the case, because ultimately they're going to send Michael Sussman to the FBI with this data that they've compiled, and that's where Michael Sussman's going to allegedly lie. Now, Durham filed a motion to compel certain documents that have been redacted, certain documents that have been withheld, and the Sussman campaign the Sussman attorneys were the first to respond to that. And it was a pretty strong response by them, where they said, first, there's a timeliness issue. Durham should have taken care of this in the grand jury proceedings. And to the extent that there's any discrepancies, Durham should have brought those to the grand jury judge. And they're seeking to dismiss that just on procedural grounds, that Durham is doing this later. And has, as King has pointed out many times, that's essentially because the grand jury is supposed to have the most complete information in order to make their decisions. And to the extent that any information is not in their possession, you don't get a second bite at the apple later on. So that's one component that Sussman's seeking to dismiss on. He is also claiming that these emails are irrelevant. But in the same vein, he's also stating that if the judge grants this in-camera review and reverses and allows all this stuff in, that it's going to totally change their defense. So that's a little bit contradictory. And then we also have a whole lot of interveners. So that's what we saw over the last couple of days. And we saw Fusion GPS intervene in the case. We saw Hillary Clinton, Hillary for America intervene. The DNC kind of latched onto that filing. Perkins Coie did a filing as well. And the crux of what they're all stating is that Fusion GPS was contracted in order to provide not legal services, but advice for the purpose of Perkins Coie attorneys like Mark Elias and Michael Sussman and their efforts to provide legal services to their client, the Clinton campaign. So we're going to go ahead and kind of get into that. King, I don't know if you want to hop in and kind of share any thoughts that you've had over the last couple of days seeing all these filings, or MB, I don't know if you have any reaction as well. I'd be interested in hearing from both of you.
You want me to start with the motion to compel and the responses? Is that where we're headed? Okay.
Yes. Yep.
I have some things to say about the motion to compel and the response by Sussman. But before I get to that, the most interesting thing I thought in all of this were the objections and responses by the Perkins Coie, the Clinton campaign, Jaffe, and Fusion GPS in response, trying to keep out of production, keep from turning over documents. We don't know what those documents are. They must be pretty damning because they're going way out of the way to keep them away from Durham. The theory is this. This is the theory, and you guys can kind of decide for yourself whether this makes any sense at all. Start with what a attorney-client privilege is. It's a legal doctrine designed to keep and maintain confidentiality of communications between a lawyer and a client, provided those communications are made during the course of and in during the course of a legal representation, legal issues that come up, legal strategies that the lawyer and the client have to talk about, legal opinions that the attorney is asked for and gives to his client. By their very nature, they are highly confidential. That's why if they are disclosed to third parties who are not a client or who are not associated with an agent of the client, the privilege is waived. By their nature, they have to be confidential. The other privilege or protection against disclosure is attorney's work product. And the theory here is that when an attorney is engaged by a client, anticipating some future litigation, the attorney, by the nature of his work, will do research, he'll interview witnesses, he'll make a file, he may hire an investigator or a consultant to advise him on how to create the best strategy to defend the client when that litigation ultimately happens. Again, the hallmark is confidentiality. And unlike the attorney, in the case of the attorney-client privilege, the privilege belongs to the client. He can insist on maintaining it, or he can waive it, which means there's no further privilege. As to the attorney work product protection, that belongs to the attorney. The premise is, the philosophy behind it is that we don't want judges and juries and other third parties to get into the heads of lawyers. We don't want them to understand what work goes into a case before it happens, because lawyers, as a matter of public policy, should be free to, consider all options. It would be unfair to take one of those options and blow it up and show it to the jury, because that would be misleading, and it would inhibit the lawyer in doing what his job is, which is partly to promote justice. Here, you've got two clients. Perkins Coie is the law firm. Sussman is one of the lawyers in Perkins Coie. That law firm and Sussman had two clients who were mixed up in this investigation. One is the Clinton campaign, and I'll add the Democratic National Committee. That'd be three clients: the campaign, the DNC, and Mr. Jaffe. Attorney-client privilege would, on the face of things, apply to communications between Jaffe and Sussman, Jaffe and other lawyers at Perkins Coie, and between the Clinton campaign and those lawyers. It's public knowledge that Perkins Coie engaged Fusion GPS in April 2016, after Fusion had been working for several months for a Republican client that it had to do opposition research on Donald Trump. They've been doing this for several months. Somehow Fusion and the Perkins Coie lawyers got in touch with one another. Fusion sold its services, sold Perkins Coie on its ability to do oppo research. They signed the contract. And here's where Mark Elias comes in. He's the head lawyer, the head lawyer doing all of the political work at the law firm. He structures this deal with Fusion as sort of a consulting arrangement whereby, in anticipation of being sued by Donald Trump, he would get advice from Fusion so that he could then advise his client, the campaign, on how to prevent or keep from being sued by Trump, how to structure and word their public pronouncements about how bad Trump was without exposing them to a lawsuit. So that's the theory of it. But in practice, the way it worked was Fusion went right along doing the opposition research that it had been doing and expanded it. They signed a subcontract, so to speak, with Christopher Steele, the former British spy, who set about to create the dossier, most of which was fabricated. Fusion also worked with another Perkins client, Jaffe, in gathering facts, theories, and what have you as to the Alpha Bank story. And they packaged all this stuff they were coming up with to tar Trump. They packaged it and they took it to their favorite reporters, some of whom were on the payroll. They would pay reporters to plant opposition research in the papers. Those that weren't on the payroll, they just took and then did a sales job on them, pressured them, did everything they could think of to make sure it all got into the papers. And at the same time, they were assisting in narrative building, writing it up so that it was believable and plausible, so they could get it out, and so that Hillary could talk about it in debates, and so the press would pick it up, and not least, so the FBI would consider it plausible and launch an investigation. Despite all of that, which made it all non-confidential because they're putting it out to the world, they still adhere to this fallacious structure that Elias tried to create, whereby Fusion would be a consultant to Perkins Coie in its engagement to provide legal advice to both Jaffe and the campaign. The briefs that were filed, sometimes in the law, um, lawyers and clients maybe go too far. They'd probably be better off staying in bed rather than filing something in court. That kind of characterizes Fusion's filing. From the analysis of whether attorney-client privilege or attorney-work product applies in a given context and applies to given particular documents is pretty fact intensive. You have to establish a factual basis for a connecting a attorney-client relationship to particular work done by the lawyer, to again particular help by the third-party consultant, show how they all fit together, how it was designed and to be and kept in confidence. There was never a waiver, never any thought that it would go public. And it's all secret. And Fusion, of course, can't say that. So if you look at the filing, there's not an affidavit or declaration by any current or former Fusion employees. I gather most of them are taking the fifth. They don't explain what they did, why they went to the press, how often they went to the press, whether any of it was kept away from the press. All they say is, oh, gee, we were a consultant and they're hired by a lawyer, therefore it's all protected. And no matter what we say in these documents, Judge, they're privileged and you can't turn them over.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's some specific points that some of these filings bring up, and I kind of want to offer them up to you for your analysis. So, one of them from Fusion GPS's standpoint, or Mark Elias, he's basically saying that, in contrast to what Fusion GPS has written about in books and many quotes out there in the media, and their history as opposition research, they're claiming that they engaged Fusion GPS in order to provide some degree of legal assistance to them in their advising of the Clinton campaign. And what I wanted to ask you, I mean, what they're claiming is this work was done in anticipation of litigation because Donald Trump sues everybody under the sun. So, I mean, what's the standard of how anticipatory you can be with litigation before that argument holds water or doesn't hold water?
It's a question of reasonableness. Did you reasonably believe there would be litigation? And were the services reasonably necessary for the lawyer to use to help prepare for the litigation? Well, here this thing is, I mean, almost specious on his face because in his book, Glenn Simpson said they were hired to do opposition research, which implies and was in fact to be made public and given to the press and argued about by the candidate in debates and in speeches. And you get on the internet, you'll see all kinds of associates of the campaign. Jake Sullivan, Robbie Mook, Hillary Clinton herself, all of them talking about this big trove of evidence that their experts and their news people have found linking Trump to Russia. Well, you can trace all of that back to Fusion. That was their job. Their job was to smear Trump.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, go ahead.
I think one of the other arguments that I found pretty interesting was actually in the Joffe filing. So Rodney Joffe basically said that he wanted legal advice from Perkins Coie, and he's basically saying, well, Perkins Coie didn't have the expertise to give him the advice that he needed, and so on the advice of counsel or whatever, he solicited or obtained the help of Fusion GPS in his interest or whatever. Like it's so ridiculous. Whatever he's trying to argue, but basically he's saying that his communications to Fusion GPS should be protected because there's like an intermediary exemption is basically what he's arguing. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on the Joffe claim. Don't mean to put you on the spot, but
yeah, it's also a stretch, a really long stretch. What the type of situation he's talking about is where you go to a lawyer for tax advice or in anticipation of some litigation with the tax authorities. A lawyer might retain a CPA or a tax accountant to help him and advise him as to the state of the client's taxes. And the client in that context will meet with the accountant, show the accountant his books and records, give him copies of the tax return so the accountant can gather up the information and report to the lawyer. That's not what Joffe even is describing. He's not describing a situation where Fusion is acting as an agent for the law firm to gather up information from Joffe, to take it to the law firm so they can then give advice back to Joffe about the information they gathered up. They're talking about gathering up the information, writing up a report, spinning it to Hillary's advantage, and taking it to the press and to the FBI to spin a story. That's different.
All righty. I see we have Damien who just requested to speak. Damien, I don't know if you have any thoughts or comments that you want to make. Damien, you're there. All right, we can circle back to you.
I do want to point out something here.
Yeah.
We all know that Durham is investigating a conspiracy case. Fundamental to any criminal conspiracy is an agreement, either expressed or implied, to, as a group, violate some law or laws. So at its heart is an agreement. What these filings that we saw all have in common is they're hiding behind an agreement to keep it secret on its face. We're not going to tell anybody what we're doing or why we're doing it. We're going to keep it secret. Perkins Coie has an agreement with Jaffe. Perkins Coie has an agreement with Fusion. It has an agreement with the campaign. Fusion has an agreement with Christopher Steele. All of it, in the end, produced a massive smear against Trump that was taken to the law enforcement officials and to the press. If you take it to the press, that you have a First Amendment right. You can lie to the press, but you can't lie to the FBI, and that's what Durham is investigating. Did they form a conspiracy to take false and fabricated information to the FBI? And to prove that, he starts with an agreement. Well, they just gave him a stack of agreements that all say we're going to be secret about this. Uh, the next step is for him to show that these agreements are a subterfuge. They are designed to prevent third parties, including the courts and the FBI, from knowing what really happened. So, in one way, they've kind of stuck their neck into Durham's noose.
Yeah, I'd certainly agree with that. And just to tie something up that seems maybe to the layperson that doesn't seem so obvious, certain parties are arguing legal services because if you're not arguing that something is legal services, then it's really hard to argue attorney-client privilege if it's not for a legal service. I think that connection wasn't really well hashed out as far as the discussion earlier.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, it's fascinating, right? Because even in this filing, I think this is from Sussman, there's one section where they addressed these emails from Fusion GPS, and they have a table of these emails, and the one consistent aspect of this particular table is all these emails relate to members of the media. So these are members of Fusion GPS emailing members of the media regarding Alpha Bank allegations or at least the servers. So the fact that it's to a reporter, it kind of speaks to the breakdown of privilege. Where I mean, if you're communicating this stuff to members of the media, you can't go back and claim privilege. And these emails are actually to members of the media. So above that, I mean, we have testimony from Michael Sussman where he outlines. He said, "Yeah, I went to Washington Post. I was talking to the New York Times. I was talking to this guy from Slate, Franklin Ford." So he's setting up all these meetings and he's participating in these conversations. And he's arranging these discussions with the cyber researchers, apparently. And then, I mean, there's really nothing to rest a privilege claim on, it would seem. So I don't know if you think. I guess I'm curious what you think is the strongest argument that they have. Is it on the grounds that Durham is seeking relief from the trial judge and not going to the grand jury to address anything that's redacted or that he didn't get? Is that the strongest argument, or do you think of something else, King?
I think Sussman has the strongest argument on that point, and the fact that it comes awfully late compared to the trial date. The trial is less than a month away, and Durham is trying to enforce some grand jury subpoenas. They were first issued last summer, I think July 2021, well before Sussman was indicted. And the privilege was asserted at that time, and Durham did not challenge it. There have been some updated objections, updated disclosures of documents that they claim privilege as to, but still, Durham could have, and Sussman argues should have, teed this up with the grand jury or the chief judge, which oversees the grand jury, last summer before the indictment. Now is just too late. I don't know what the judge is going to do with it. Uh, uh, that's kind of a flip of the coin. On the other point, though, these documents are still out there. They're, Durham has asked the judge to read them in camera, which means behind closed doors, without anybody else present, and decide based on what they say whether they should be turned over. And that's going to be an interesting process if the judge does that. There's another point that I think Durham is holding a trump card, and no pun intended. He's just announced in one of these recent filings that he's going to give a grant of immunity to a Fusion employee by all. A reasonable guess would be that would be Laura Seago, whose name appears on some of these documents. She did not sign an affidavit claiming privilege. So she could very well, if she's the one that's going to be granted immunity, she was at some meetings that the lawyers and her bosses and Jaffe held in the Perkins Coie law offices, and can testify that this had nothing to do with legal advice. They were up to smearing Trump. Uh, like I said, that could blow this whole thing sky high.
Yeah,
Speaking of
I
that,
agree.
sorry, Damon.
No, go ahead.
So in the hearing yesterday, Andrew DeFilippis had an interesting part of a statement where I can read it pretty much verbatim. It's my scribbling down, so it might be a little bit off. But we assume that this was probably Laura Seago. We don't know for sure, but somebody was in this meeting because they described who attended it. And the statement that the prosecutor made yesterday was, this project was originated with Tech Executive One, was carried out with the help of agents of the Clinton campaign, and there were meetings with campaign lawyer one, with the defendant, in which Tech Executive One is encouraged to create imprints in a narrative tying the presidential candidate to Russia through data. So that sounds like a conspiracy on its face. Obviously, they have someone in that room would probably be the most likely way that they would know who was sitting there and what they were discussing. But that sounds like a pretty consequential bit that the prosecution is sitting on.
Yeah, I have to agree. And I think it would be fascinating if it's Laura Seago, because I don't think she just has a role in the alpha stuff. I think she's gonna be able to offer testimony on everything else too, obviously. So that would be huge. I think it's a great point that you made, and I'm glad you keyed in on that. I think that was the one moment that I really had my eyebrows raised in that conference call, because Durham's team really got into it. I thought it was a really strong statement that they made. And to your point, I mean, there's some meeting where Elias and Sussman were encouraging Rodney Jaffe to find this data. So that's really damning. Got one person, Esquisas. I'm going to go ahead and add you as a speaker. I don't know if you have a question or a comment, but go ahead.
Yeah. Hey, thank you. I just had a question about kind of the whole scope of it. And, King mentioned earlier that it's a conspiracy case, and that, they sick the whole media apparatus at Trump for simply being in power. And the whole thing kind of started with the hack, the DNC hack. And if I remember correctly, the transfer speed was kind of more similar to a USB uh, a USB drive transfer. And that, I'm really curious. I don't mean to invite unhealthy skepticism or anything, but I'm curious how deep this rabbit hole goes. And a conspiracy case insinuates a large group of people. And where was that USB drive? You know, and who had it? And a young man was killed that a lot of people speculate was the man that was a leak, and it was never a hack. And it's like watching a movie and having a really good idea of what the ending might be. And I'm speaking to a bunch of very smart people who might have some answers, but I don't know, in terms of the jurisdiction of a special counsel, like what he might be able to do with his findings. Because I also understand that if he as soon as he moves forward with Sussman and moves forward at all and starting to prosecute, then your findings they're pretty well done and said. I mean, I'm a layman, but that's my understanding of the situation. Thank you again.
Yeah, thanks for the question. So I'm a little bit further out there. I think a little bit more, a little bit more willing to speculate on that point. I lean towards the DNC being a false flag, the DNC hack being a false flag operation. I do not put a whole lot of confidence in the USB transfer speed analysis. It's been a couple years since I actually looked at it. I remember reading some smart people that took a look at it, and it was not nearly as strong as what was originally presented. And as it relates to Seth Rich, I think that's just a horrific situation. I don't think there's any reason whatsoever to invoke his name anymore. I mean, there's been absolutely nothing that's developed out of that story. I don't see how he would fit in at all. I don't think they would need him even. And I'm sitting here saying, like, I think it's a false flag operation, and I don't see any role for Seth Rich in that whatsoever. I don't, there's been so much focus on that, and it's because I think Fox News and some other networks really put a lot of focus on that a few years ago. But I just don't see it for him to be in that role. I mean, if you want to take a takeaway, I mean, don't walk home at 4 a.m. in liberal cities. I mean, that's the takeaway. So that I don't want to go down the Seth Rich road at all, and I tend to shut down that conversation. I'm very willing to be proven wrong. Maybe something will come out and say, yeah, it was Seth Rich the whole time, but I'm just not there now. As it relates to like a false flag operation, I think there's just much more simpler theories that could be discussed. I don't really want to go down those roads, down a road of speculating, but I mean, there's a whole host of people that are involved in that investigation and interfacing with CrowdStrike and interfacing with the FBI. That would have the opportunity, that would have the administrative opportunity to take the emails themselves and parse through them. And we know exfiltration was weeks after CrowdStrike was contracted, and we know that the actual emails that were uploaded to WikiLeaks were not all that damning. And despite every report out there talking about they were looking for Trump opposition research, what they actually put out, was nothing like that. And they didn't put out chat logs. They didn't put out all the stuff that was in the reports at the time. And I have this theory that the people that were destroyed in the release of those documents, I mean, you could almost make a case that there's a grudge there. There's a kind of a conflict with the Clinton campaign. So I don't know. I mean, like I said, I'm leaning towards that direction, but maybe it is the Russians, and maybe it's all true up to that point. I don't know. I don't want to make any conclusive statements. But there's going to be, I mean, there's interesting stuff that's developing, and we'll see what comes up in the news reports over the next few days and next few months. So, thanks for the question.
No, thank you. And I didn't mean to bring in too much unhealthy speculation there. I just can't help with the amount of curiosity that's out there, and I do appreciate you addressing that. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
I would add this: if putting myself in Durham's shoes, he is faced with uh, bias and prejudgments by potential juries, potential jurors, no matter where he brings this case. Uh, Everybody he's going to talk to as a potential juror is going to believe with 100% certainty that the Russians hacked the DNC and hacked uh, and stole Podesta's emails and turned them over to WikiLeaks. If Durham cannot produce smoking gun type evidence to show that was all a lie, a false flag operation, a whatever, uh, he's not going to touch it because the bias in favor of that theory is going to be so strong. So don't be surprised if he brings the conspiracy case and never mentions the veracity of the Russians hacked the DNC theory. He'll take that as a given, or he could take that as a given, and still try a really strong conspiracy case involving everything else.
Yeah. Michael, I just added you a speaker. I don't know if you have a question or comment. Go ahead.
Hey, guys. First, I just want to say he's doing a great job. I just want to piggyback off the last guy's comments. There's a ex-Fox News reporter, Adam Housley, that I've been following for a few years, and he's been making a few mentions that the investigation is a lot bigger than anybody can anticipate, is anticipating. I wanted to know if you know anything about Adam and what are your thoughts on that? That's all I had. Thanks, guys.
I think he's super sharp. He's definitely been on top of things that later proved out to be true, and he doesn't tend to exaggerate or say things that are very speculative, at least that I've seen. So he's one of the guys that when he says something, I definitely listen. But that being said, I think King makes a good point, and it's the same thing with this. Just because you have a strong suspicion or there's even like really good evidence that some of these things might be true doesn't mean you're going to be able to prove it to such an extent that you're going to move the needle in the public, much less in front of a jury. So you really want to be careful of what you can definitely prove. And I think I've said from the beginning that you need witnesses for a lot of these things. You need somebody that was in the room that said, I saw this being done. I was in this conversation, and is willing to testify to that, because people just are not going to believe whatever the evidence is. You know, sometimes emails maybe, but I think in general for a lot of this stuff, especially the more conspiracy it sounds, you need somebody that was there and can say, yeah, I saw this guy do this, or I did it myself maybe, and I was on the orders of this. So that's my take on it.
Yeah, I'm not sure I have anything to add to that. I like Adam. I do follow him. He doesn't post about Durham all the time. I mean, whenever he posts, it's usually something interesting and worth reading. I mean, I've taken a few leads from his posts and put in a lot of FOIAs on some of those leads, just fishing for stuff. So those haven't come back yet. We'll see. I don't know. He's thrown a couple names out there at various points that were pretty interesting. But he's, I think he also said something about Brennan and kind of like a side operation Brennan had, and I don't know if anything ever really developed in that. So we'll see. I mean, seems like a good guy, and he seems to have good sources, and I'm sure he has a reason for everything that he posts. So
I read him also, and I have noticed that a year and a half ago or so, he was, or maybe as recently as a year ago, he was talking about a whole lot grander scale for what Durham's criminal charges would look like. He has scaled those predictions back somewhat or qualified them because he he is not sure to what extent politics, DOJ, political pressure may have caused Durham to rethink how big this should be, at least in terms of criminal charges, as opposed to a final report that lays it all out.
Yeah, I will gonna add the other Michael, and other Michael, if you have a question or comment, go ahead. Looks like there might be a connection issue. Let's go to Weak Cheeks. How's it going? Weak Cheeks, do you want to jump in? Question or comment?
Sure. Can you guys hear me? Just want to make sure you can hear me before I start talking.
Yes.
Great. Thank you. The other day, I don't know if it was because time goes by so fast nowadays. I don't know if you had a podcast the other day, but I talked about a conspiracy. It'd be a conspiracy to defraud the United States government because what blows my mind is think about that Comey and Ray and Brennan. In other words, Comey and Ray knew since the beginning of 2017 the Steele dossier was not corroborated, but they let Trump hang out in the wind for years on this. And the same thing with the CIA. They said came out with Durham that they don't believe the Alpha Bank stuff. They think it was possibly made up. So I don't understand how Durham wouldn't be called. But besides the Clinton people, also there was a conspiracy within the government itself, a conspiracy to defraud the United States government from outside and inside. And I never see this narrative really playing out. You see what I'm saying?
In a perfectly just world, reading the letter of the law, I wholly agree with you. But we don't live in that universe.
Yeah, I mean, as it relates to inside the government actors, if you're talking about the FBI or the Obama administration or the State Department officials, I mean, we've talked about this a few for the past couple chats now, and we're starting to lose the idea that Durham might actually go after them. On the face of it, yes, there's probably some actors there that Durham could pursue, but there's kind of a strong argument in that they were acting within their realm of responsibility, and they were in the performance of their duties. They came into information that we know now was fabricated, and they have an argument to make that they were just overzealous and not necessarily criminal. And to prove a criminal statute, Durham is not going to bring a case like that unless he can get a conviction. He's not going to risk his reputation and the entirety of his case going up in flames because he can't, prove that a particular FBI agent acted with criminal intent and, get a conviction there. So, King, I don't know if you want to add into that. I know we've talked about that quite a bit. Otherwise, we can go to the next.
I just have one last thing to say, but
sure.
people are forgetting every night on the news, Trump's presidency was about to fall. Like people are forgetting what was going on back then. Every night it looked like his presidency was over any minute, and people have forgotten about the hysteria that went on at the time. There's a lot, you know what I mean? It's 3 or 4 years later, people due to COVID, people forgot. But at the time, it looked like he was going to be frog marched out by Mueller any moment, or people are forgetting what went on. This was a big story.
Yeah, and I've made that point a few times myself. I mean, we've come so far since those initial days where, any news report you look at back then, they're all wrong, and everything they said they claimed was based on sources. They may come on the news and they say based on 6 sources at a particular agency, this is what we think, and they did that. There's stories out there where they cited 6 unnamed sources that were completely wrong, just completely fabricated, not any iota of truth in it. And yeah, that's extremely troubling. But I don't know. I wish Durham would do something. Stephen Soma did a lot of things wrong that we know about in the FISA warrants. I wish he would pick off a few people, but kind of is what it is. I mean, I don't know. I know Durham's got a big case right now. I think it's much larger than people are thinking, kind of like Adam Housley has said, but I don't know that it's going to include FBI people.
Weak Cheeks is right. It's the whole thing is baffling.
I just have one last thing to say, then you can go to the next person. And I appreciate you giving me some time. But this is my last thing. This is like one of these things people forget about. Remember when Trump was the president and they leaked his phone conversations with I think it was the president of Mexico and Australia. Do you remember that?
Yep.
That is mind blowing, and no one was held accountable. You know what I mean? I'm just saying is the leaks, all the leaks that came out of the White House. I know this is going to sound like a conspiracy theory. It is, but I think the FBI and the CIA were listening to him in the White House and leaking everything 24/7 to get him out.
Well, I don't know if I would name anybody specifically, and I certainly don't think it's the FBI. But you have people like Charamella and these other people that were there, and yes,
Reality
there was.
winner.
Yeah, I mean, like the first 150 days that Trump was in office, there was a record number of leaks. Like we've never seen it before in our country. I think in 150 days, I think there was like 145 leaks, and it was something insane like that. So. Yeah,
But
massive problems. Yes, there was probably a.
But notice the minute Joe Biden gets in, all the leaks stop.
Yep.
Enough said. I appreciate you taking the time to listening to me as always. Thank you so much.
Yep. Thank you.
Yeah. Let me jump in.
Sure.
I agree 100%. There is a inside the government conspiracy case, criminal case, to be made. Whether Durham wants to devote the effort and resources to make it, it may be too big to bring as a criminal case, but it's there. You have multitude of not just leaks, but leaks of classified information, starting with the leak of the phone calls, and then add the leak of the Flynn Kislyak call, and it goes on from there. I've always felt that the easiest part of the object of conspiracy to pick off happened with the last the last FISA renewal on the quarter page warrant. That was June 28th. By then, they knew that Danchenko had disowned most of what Steele says he was the source for in the dossier. Despite having interviewed him in January and then again in May, on June 28th, they told the FISA court for a second time that they had interviewed Danchenko and they found him to be credible, period. They didn't say about anything about Danchenko saying this was mostly bar talk. It was rumors, unsubstantiated rumors, and a lot of what's in that dossier, I didn't tell Christopher Steele. They did not mention that. That's fraud on the court. So if Durham wants to bring a case like that and wants to make it a conspiracy, all he has to do is to put the same FBI and DOJ people, including perhaps Rod Rosenstein, Sting, who knew that they were lying to the court about Danchenko in June, put those people in the same room with some of the leakers and prove up a conspiracy to take down the president.
One of the things about the government angle to this, or if it's a separate circle, the statute of limitations is going to run longer because a lot of these things actually happened later. And if it's a conspiracy case, then that's fine. It wouldn't matter anyway because it would be the last act in continuance of the conspiracy. So, but there were some potential crimes that happened still after all this. The last FISA warrant's a good one, but a lot of the Mueller stuff also is going to show up there because his group was still going until Barr was appointed in like 2019. So when those cell phones were wiped and disappeared and all kinds of things like that, there's a lot of acts that potentially could come into play. It's not quite as time sensitive as this other stuff. And we're all we want things to happen fast, and it's been a long time already. But the only reason the Sussman thing happened so fast is because it just so happened that he had to file against the statute of limitations, and that's why everything's kind of scrambled right now. But there's still lots of things out there that potentially we could see some action on.
Yeah, and I mean, as it relates to the final FISA warrant, I mean, that's obviously the worst one. By then, they had gotten nothing from the first 3 FISA warrants. They had actually done some investigative work by that time, and they knew basically nothing in the dossier was true. So the final FISA warrant is it's criminal, right? The FISA warrant, the FISA court has already ruled that invalid. They actually ruled the third FISA warrant invalid as well. So there's really no question about that. And, I think it's interesting. Ivan Vorontsov, along with all the other subsources of Igor Danchenko, have signed written affidavits where they say they're absolutely not sources for Igor Danchenko. But it's also interesting. Vorontsov signed another affidavit where he actually wrote that June 2016, the FBI pulled him out of the Spazzo house in basically the embassy over there in wherever it was. And I think it was Moscow.
It was Moscow.
Yeah, Moscow. Yeah. And they interviewed him and talked about Igor Danchenko. Now, if it's June 2016, that seems a little bit unusual. So a lot of us think that's actually June 2017. But even if it's June 2017, that's when they actually got the last FISA warrant. So by then, they had actually went and pulled out the subsource, Vorontsov. And Vorontsov, I don't know what he told them, but I know, whatever he told them probably was really damning for the narrative. And they didn't share that with the FISA court. And even if it was subsequent to that final application, you still have a duty to go back to the FISA court and inform them of exculpatory evidence. So I would really like to see some people held accountable for that. But yeah, I don't know if we should have hope at this point or not. Durham has been holding it really close to the vest. And we'll just have to see.
Keep your eye on that last FISA warrant. That may prompt a criminal charge in and of itself, even with non-conspiracy, just straight up they lied to the court. If it's a conspiracy, if that's an overt act in inside the government conspiracy, June 28th is not the deadline to file. The deadline is 5 years from the last overt act. Well, overt acts on the FISA warrants continued up until they stopped gathering information and surveilling Carter Page, which would have been at the end of September 2017. And then past that, there was all sorts of cover-up, including perhaps wiping phones by the Mueller team and giving false statements to Congress and to the FISA court. DOJ wrote a letter to the FISA court a year or so later, basically reiterating they thought their everything they said in that warrant was true. And they knew better. They knew it was not. That last warrant, Cash Patel has talked about it. He said it was the worst. There are things in there that nobody knows yet because it's classified. Uh, it was among the These were among the documents that Trump was supposed to have declassified, but somehow it didn't happen. But he said he knows of things about that renewal that would by far make it the worst.
Yeah, I have seen those interviews that Cash has said that. And, I tried, you know, I don't know whether to be hopeful or not. I know John Ratcliffe has given some interviews where he sent some criminal referrals and obviously a whole lot of documents to John Durham. And based on what Ratcliffe has seen, he says it would support additional indictments, and that's going to be related to government actors. Ratcliffe didn't know about Joffe and all that, so I would hope there is something there. I know there's also allegations that there's something that the CIA has that's really, really damning. And the CIA has fought really hard to keep it under wraps. So I don't know. Maybe there is something coming. I don't want to rule anything out, but we'll have to see. Oh boy, we have 7 people requesting to speak. Let me see here. Let's go to Not Roger. How's it going? Not Roger, are you there?
Can you hear me?
Yes. How's it going?
Good. How are you?
Pretty good.
It's funny. I requested to speak because I was going to bring up the same subject as your last one. Basically, there's this glaring hole where any of the people working within the intelligence community have not been really addressed as to their behavior. They're other than Baker. And with Baker, it seems that Durham's taking the approach that he was snookered, which, that seems kind of far-fetched. But I'm kind of wondering whether Durham's going to both do indictments and write a report. And if he writes a report, perhaps he will document more fully the intelligence community's role in all these things, particularly the ICA, things like that. I'm just wondering what your guys' thoughts are on that.
Yeah, so I think there will be additional indictments. I don't know how many, but what Durham has teed up so far would tend to support additional indictments. He is required by special counsel regulations to submit a written report. Garland has committed to releasing as much of that publicly as possible. But Durham is not a guy that's known for writing reports. He's not real excited about doing it. And he talks. There's one conversation out there where he talks at a particular school, and kind of the takeaway from that is you don't damage somebody's reputation if you can't charge them criminally, and if you can't get a conviction, you don't go to trial, and you you don't blindly just use the Justice Department to smear somebody or to damage them as people. So I don't know. I don't know how in depth a report is really going to go. I don't think it's going to go as far as we like. It's not going to go into a whole bunch of misconduct that Durham couldn't charge. I don't expect that it's going to be like the Mueller report at all. But we'll see. I guess I could be wrong.
He's done a couple of other almost special prosecutions in his career, right? He did something on the waterboarding. I believe.
Yes.
In fact, I think Gina Haspel was one of the subjects of his investigation, which is kind of interesting. And then there's a documentation that he was involved in the leaks, right? The early 2017. He was even quoted in Senate testimony that they thought it was the Utah district attorney or whatever his name is.
Huber.
Yeah, not the Huber from Twitter, but the other Huber. But then it turned out in the testimony they said it was Durham. But was there ever any sort of indictment or report that came out of that, in spite of the 120 leaks that happened during, as one of our listeners has documented?
Yeah, no, there wasn't any report as it relates to any of the leaks. There weren't any indictments. So, yeah, Durham did do some leak investigation work. It becomes really interesting to note that I.G. Horowitz had these cell phones from Baker and others, and apparently Durham was kind of unaware of that because I think Durham interacted with them during the leak investigation. And I think there were some allegations that Baker was actually one of the leakers. So to find out now that Durham didn't even have the cell phone or anything like that, I don't know how much work Durham really did. We do have some text messages from Strzok out there where Strzok was going to meet with John Durham related to something. So, yeah, Durham's been poking around a little bit since 2017, but he was appointed formally to actually look at Crossfire Hurricane. I think it was March and April 2019. And then it became a criminal probe in October 2019. The I.G. Horowitz report was released publicly in December 2019, and at that time, Durham released a public statement saying he didn't agree with the conclusions as it relates to predication,
Right.
indicating that he didn't think that Crossfire Hurricane was properly predicated. And then he was appointed special counsel by Bill Barr around the election time. So with that, special counsel is where he's actually required now to submit a written report. But again, I don't know how comprehensive it'll be.
Yeah, and one final question or point that I'm wondering. Comey was fired in May, correct? I think he was.
Yes.
And until Comey was fired, the only real focus of the investigation into Trump was connections with Russia, not with obstruction, because the obstruction really started with Trump firing Comey, correct?
Yeah, I mean, I guess they kind of claim that. Yeah, everything that they cite as obstruction are public events. So there's nothing like behind the scenes. But yes, there's public statements. I think they point to one episode where Trump said something to the effect of Russia find her emails.
That was back in October of the prior year, right?
That's right. Well, I think it was July of the prior year.
That's not obstruction. That's just conspiracy to, right?
Yeah, so I don't know what they called it, but it was all garbage, so I didn't really pay attention to it.
At any rate, my point is this: by May, from what I've read, the FBI and everyone knew that most of this stuff was a bunch of crap.
Yes.
If not all, right?
Yes.
And the only thing they were looking at Trump on was conspiracy with Russians, not with obstruction of justice, because that really queued up. In fact, Comey even said he gamed it that way to try to get a special prosecutor. Correct? I think he did. So either there's something still out there that got everybody in the intelligence community really riled up that we don't know about, or there was a conspiracy within the intelligence community to get rid of Trump. I can't see any other explanation.
Yeah, I mean, I think I posed that as a tweet a few days ago. I mean, I don't know if it's a crime or not on the part of Comey to leak memos for the express purpose of getting a special counsel appointed, knowing now that Comey had to know that every allegation had been debunked. Igor Danchenko had done at least 2 interviews by that point where he had totally dispelled and debunked every allegation that was attributed to him, and every other investigative lead that they had come up with had turned up nothing, and they had 3 FISA warrants by then that had turned up nothing. So
And they
yes,
also had the CIA saying that Hillary was from Russia, wiretap or whatever, that Hillary was doing this back in July. I think they picked that up in 2016. So all
yeah.
the
Well, we also
signs.
found out just a couple days ago that the CIA had concluded by February 2017, or excuse me, I shouldn't say that. I don't think we know the exact date, but the CIA had concluded in 2017 that these pings and these allegations around Rodney Joffe and the DNS servers, that they were user created or tool created. So yes, there was a lot of knowledge inside the government by May 2017 that all this was bogus, all this was garbage. And yes, Comey leaked the memo for the purpose of getting a special counsel appointed, knowing that it was all garbage. And yes, I think that should be criminal. But
not only that, but the decision making within the FBI and DOJ at that point should have turned everything off before Comey was fired. They
yes,
would
but
have, you know.
Should have is not a criminal statute, though, and that's the problem. I think it should be a crime, and I should there should be a couple statutes in there that with creative lawyering that somebody like John Durham could bring a prosecution. It's an unprecedented situation. We've never seen anything like this before in our country. I mean, Watergate does not even come close to comparing. When you see the apparatus that was really turned against a president. So yes, it's going to take an unprecedented argument to win a case or to try a case because it's an unprecedented situation. And I don't know that our laws are geared towards bringing a case like that. So I don't know. I don't know what Durham's going to do. Maybe he brings a case, maybe he doesn't.
Just a final point. We've seen a lot of documentation on the mechanizations of the Obama DOJ up to the inauguration, which was late January. I haven't seen a lot of documentation on what happened within the DOJ after Trump's inauguration, from that point to the Comey firing. Has there been much disclosure of decisions made, people involved? Mueller and his pit bull Weissman didn't really come into the scene until the special counsel office was put in hand, even though I know Mueller or Weissman was playing games behind the scene. So has there been much disclosure of what happened from February through the point that the special counsel office started up? I think in June, was it, or May or June?
Yeah, special counsel started in May 2017.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, there's some events in there, but nothing. I mean, we just don't have the insight or the knowledge. I mean, it was pretty chaotic in the Trump administration with, half the government working against Trump and leaking and everything else, and then, the
and
Trump people probably
and his AG recusing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Anyway, I think there's some things to be learned during that period that would implicate government officials, because by that point they knew what was going on and they made decisions against the duly elected president, and that should be a crime.
It should be, but we'll see. Maybe we need some new laws passed by next Congress. That's entirely possible. Well, that's pretty likely.
All right.
Based on everything. Yeah.
Sorry
thank
for
you.
taking up your time too much, but
yeah. No problem. Thank you.
Yeah.
That is an interesting period of time to me between February and Mueller taking office, because it did seem like Trump's people were coming in. Pompeo looked like he was really getting his arms around the CIA. And I think things would have shaken loose. It would have been really interesting if, when Mueller came in, everyone just shut down. It was like nobody wants to be on the radar screen. Nobody wants to be the target of an obstruction investigation. So I think history would have been a lot different. And so much of this just goes back to the fact that we had an attorney general that was non-present and didn't have the courage to do his job. And that really set everything off.
Well, that speaks to the effectiveness of the media campaign at the time, because they shut down everything. You couldn't question the narrative that was out there. That, you know, they were gung ho that Trump was colluding with Russia. They were going down all these rabbit holes and every piece of the Steele dossier that they could. And anybody that hinted or questioned, like, where did this come from, they were immediately shut down and they were immediately attacked. And you know, they were extremely effective. I mean, they, you know, any Republican on Congress. I mean, we look at Congress today and we say, oh, the Republicans can't do anything because they're in the minority and they don't have subpoena power. The Democrats were in the minority. I mean, you know, the GOP had all three houses. They had the Senate, they had the House, they had the presidency, and still, you know, there were all these investigations that were predominantly run by Democrats, and you had Adam Schiff out there, and everything else that was going on, and people that had critical thinking skills and the ability and, you know, the expectation that they would look at this with a critical, you know, and critique, you know, where's this coming from and what is this? They're all shut down because of this narrative. So. Got my soapbox a little bit there, but hey, JH, I saw you got added as a speaker. I don't know if you have a question or comment. What's up, man?
Yeah, thank you. It's sort of a question and a comment. So, you know, as Durham has been building and sort of revealing this case, you know, I keep asking myself why. I mean, this is the biggest case I've ever heard involving a single 1001 false statement charge that I'm aware of, and I'm sure, you know, it probably is the biggest one. But the question is why. And then, you know, I missed the discussion on Tuesday when all those documents were flying out, but I listened to it afterwards. And one of the comments that Ship made, I think it was Ship that made it, was that he sees Sussman as a tool. You know, that he's not an objective. He's just a tool that Durham's using. And I'm asking myself, you know, this kind of ties into the conversation as it's just been going here, but is Durham prosecuting this case in the way he is? And it appears, if so, very successfully, but is he just trying to penetrate this wall of privilege that Democrats have sort of built over the last half decade or so? And if so, you know, indications are, I don't know if we have any hard evidence of it, but indications are that a lot of these people, Jaffe, Sussman, all those, were also communicating with Mueller's office. We're also communicating with the FBI. We're communicating with the CIA. And if Durham gains access to all those communications and this wall of privilege is completely destroyed, that would open, you know, I think Durham probably has an outline. He has an idea of all these things that happened, but he doesn't have the evidence. And if he gains access to all these communications, suddenly he has all this evidence, you know, that can lead him right into government if he chooses to go there. And I guess the only other quick comment is that Weissman's history, he was general counsel until 2015 of the FBI, and then he moved to the criminal division. So he headed the criminal division basically from 2015 until he joined Mueller's team. And, you know, I kind of have a feeling that Weissman was already running a special counsel investigation in 2017 and maybe even 2016. And Mueller's appointment just made it official, is kind of how I feel about that. But yeah, I'll go ahead and listen.
Yeah, it's interesting comments. I don't think I have anything to add there, but that was interesting. Can't really confirm or dispute it.
Let me make a comment. It's an interesting question as to why Durham picked, of all the outside the government actors, he picked Sussman first with a single 1001 charge. The best I've come up with, the best guess, because I really don't know, is that he wanted an easy crime to prove that essentially thrust a spear into the central component of the group, the Perkins Coie run shop, whereby everything was kept secret while they were committing crimes. It's just that's his first shot. He's got more coming, I think. That's the best I can say.
Yeah, it seems like if he was trying to break this privilege thing down, he sure flushed everybody out of the woodwork, just here in this last week, with this flurry of filings and everything. So, I mean, as soon as somebody makes a filing, does that kind of open them up to exposure in this? I mean, if they're claiming privilege on something that clearly isn't privileged, does that give him access?
Well, the easiest and broadest way that he can use to bust the privilege is to show that the privilege is being used, or the attorney-client relationship between the campaign and Perkins Coie and Jaffe and Perkins Coie and the associated contract with Fusion. All of that was being used by participants in a scheme to commit crimes. So the crime fraud exception destroys the privilege altogether.
One
And
quick
you can
thing.
do that. You can do that by presenting a prima facie case without having to go to a criminal trial. Just a prima facie case presented to the judge who's overseeing the grand jury.
One quick thing to add on that. Does misstating a campaign expenditure to the FEC, does that constitute a crime? And if so, were all the people involved in a potential crime where they were claiming privilege for something that clearly wasn't, or not privilege, but you know what I mean?
That could be a crime, but I think that one's harder to prove than what he has already.
Can Durham bring that into this and say, hey, these exact same guys were just fined millions of dollars by the FEC for doing this exact thing that I'm saying they're doing, and pretending there's a privilege and there isn't?
I don't think so. I have not read it, but I believe that fine was a settlement where they did not admit liability.
Hey, Fauci, I just added you as speaker. Do you have a question or a comment? Go ahead.
What's up, gentlemen? How's it going?
Pretty good. How are you?
Yeah, not bad. Not bad, thanks. Hey, just real quick, I was, I think it was Wheat Cheeks talking about all the shenanigans, like the early days, and it was kind of taking me back. His theory about he thinks the FBI, somebody, I strongly agree. I think Durham probably sees that like on the face. Like there was no question with those crazy leaks coming out all the time. But one of the biggest things is, I don't know if you recall, but remember Reince Priebus, the chief of staff guy, kind of a little wormy dude. I didn't really know what to think of him. But when that New York Times story with all the bullshit Russian contacts came out, the big bomb that kind of set the whole thing off, he said, I remember it was like the next day, according to him, McCabe came to say, hey, look, this New York Times story, no idea where that came from. It's bullshit. None of it's true. It's totally fake. And Reince, said exactly what any human being would have said at that point. Well, great. Why don't you go out and tell people that, right? Just, go on record and say, this is bullshit. Why wouldn't you do that? And what happened the next day was insane, because the story that came out was, Trump chief of staff Priebus went to the FBI to tell them to like falsely, say that these contacts were bullshit. So like they completely used that into, so I mean, they were getting sabotaged left and right. I mean, that's very similar to the, the FISA with, hey, we interviewed Danchenko. we thought he was very believable, and they were probably right. He was very believable in saying that the dossier was horseshit, right? But they didn't say that. They just said we found him to be very believable. So like, it's clear, right? There was an FBI conspiracy to get him the hell out, like sooner than later. And Comey, I just sent the guys. I sent them to go talk to him, hoping that I could get him at a bad time, with everybody kind of moving in. So I mean, the Flynn ambush, zero question, right? They all knew what they were doing. Now they might have believed it was for a good cause, like they were, trying to save the country from this evil orange man. But there's no question that they were all involved in a conspiracy. And again, the question, and I understand they can claim that, well, we did say Danchenko was believable. I mean, they didn't really elaborate. So maybe we should have. We did a bad job, but we didn't commit a crime, right? Did McCabe commit a crime when he went in to basically bait Reince Priebus into asking him to, disavow the the Russian contacts? Like, I mean, it's just crazy stuff, And I hear what you're saying, Ryan, about Durham's not going to want to write stuff up. He would just rather kind of let his actions speak, and I agree. And I'm convinced that Durham's got the goods. He's got a plan. You don't have a 3-year investigation, right, to get a couple of guys, a couple of clowns on some low-level stuff. Like, he's got this stuff wrapped up. It's just a matter of he can, he's got to work a few magic tricks, right? He might have to do a trial in D.C. Is he going to get Sussman to Kate? Like, who knows? But anywho, I just wanted to kind of throw that out there as kind of a little way back machine stuff. So anyway, I'll just hang up.
Those were great points, and I agree 100%. And it reminds me that there is an interesting dance going on right now between Durham and Sussman's lawyers as to how far this trial goes beyond the false statement that Sussman is charged with making, where he says, "I'm not here representing any client," when in fact he was billing the Clinton campaign and actively representing Jaffe at his meeting with the FBI and Jaffe at his meeting with the CIA. So that's the lie he's charged with. The bigger issue is, what does Durham do with the data, the information, the narrative that he brought to the FBI? Sussman says, there's no way I could know it was false in any respect. I'm not charged with, excuse me, I'm not charged with lying about that. I'm only charged with lying about who I've represented. Excuse me. So, but Durham can't leave it at that because most of the jury will look at that narrative and tend to believe it. They'll go in with a bias, an ingrained bias. And when they see the narrative and the data that supports it, they're going to say, Trump was colluding with Russia. That's what they're going to think. So Sussman was doing the right thing by bringing it. He may have made a white lie, but he did the right thing by bringing the data. So Durham cannot leave that to lay there and ruin his case. He's going to put on evidence that the FBI took the data and ran it to ground, discovered that it wasn't a Trump Tower server at all. It was a server in Illinois, owned and operated by a spam mail-out enterprise that at one time was under contract with the Trump Hotel organization. And For those reasons, this whole narrative made no sense. It was totally false. And Durham will get that into evidence. Sussman is going to try to keep it or limit it to that. But he would like to leave the impression that all of this data on the face of it was plausible and plausibly created the story that there was this illegal or nefarious connection between Trump and Russia. And at the hearing they had earlier this week, and you could hear that interplay between Durham and the Sussman lawyers as to just they're like dancing around the issue. Durham can't put on evidence that this was all a fraud because that would overtake the case and screw up his case that Sussman lied about who his clients were. On the other hand, Sussman can't step over the line and bring that up as an issue as to whether it was fabricated, because that leaves the door open for Durham to come back and show it was. So it's going to be fascinating to see what the judge decides on how far that evidence can go and how it ultimately plays out at trial. The judge did not seem inclined to prejudge the issue. I think he wants to hear the evidence as it comes in. But it's going to be an interesting tap dance both sides are making as to the reliability and the authenticity of the DNS logs and other data.
So, King, I kind of want to get your thoughts on this. So, John Durham has an opportunity to respond now that everybody's filed their motions in opposition of his motion to compel documents related to the in-camera review that he's requesting. So, all these interveners came in. They had all their filings. Obviously, Durham had a really strong initial filing on the motion to compel, but he has an opportunity to respond. So if you were John Durham, I mean, is there anything that you would highlight in your response or your final motion here before the judge in order to win this motion?
Yeah, the first thing I do, I would talk in depth with the Fusion GPS person who's going to receive immunity. I'd want to know everything that person knows about what Fusion did, who directed their efforts, how did it relate, or how it didn't relate at all to any legal services. This was entirely a opposition research and smear Trump campaign. It was always designed to produce the worst information possible and put it out into the press and to the FBI if possible. That's going to be Durham's story that he's going to try to prove. And my guess is he has a witness to say that. If he does, that testimony and a declaration by that witness should blow up all of these briefs.
Do you think we'll actually get to see the declaration, kind of how Elias and some of the others that we actually saw their written statements? Do you think we'll actually see that from Durham's witness in this case, or will Durham just say, I'm going to produce this at trial?
He won't give us the whole witness's testimony, but he can put enough in the declaration to call out the other side as to the lies they presented to the court. Now, short of that, the law's on his side. He can write a purely legal brief with examples of press reports, newspaper articles, evidence that he already has that Fusion is passing on stuff to the press, and Steele is bringing stuff to the FBI. He's got a ton of evidence along those lines already. And as I said, the law is on his side. He can just brief what the law is.
It's good stuff. Thank you, King. Hobnail Boot. I think I added you as speaker. I don't know if you have a question or comment. Go ahead. Hobnail Boot, are you there?
There we go. Oh, my bad.
There you go.
Sorry.
No problem.
I just wanted to throw out my theory and see what y'all think. We've been talking about like the FBI. I don't think Durham can go after the FBI right now. They could probably, obviously, on the FISA stuff, but essentially, the way I see it, the FBI covered up a crime, and the first thing that Durham has to do is prove a crime was committed.
Yep. Yeah, I'd agree with that.
And so I think that's, if he's going to go after the FBI, it's after he says, yeah, we got conspiracy. Here's what the Clintons did. And then he can deal with, okay, Comey and everybody, why did you cover it up?
Well, I think there's a couple issues. So as it relates to Mueller and the wiping of phones, I think Durham should have a pretty strong case there if he wants to pursue obstruction of justice.
Mm-hmm.
We are going to learn a few new things over the next few days. I don't want to step on anybody's scoop.
Right.
But yeah, there's going to be some additional news there. And I think the issue as it relates back to Comey, you have to recall Comey was fired in May. So if he wants to go after Comey, it's going to have to be with a conspiracy charge, just based on statute of limitations, which are generally 5 years. Now, conspiracy statutes extend that out usually quite a bit in this instance from the last overt act. But if he wants to go to the FBI and not Mueller, that's going to be a little bit more challenging. We talked about that a little bit earlier about some possible avenues of how to get to the FBI. But if he wants to do a conspiracy case, that's obviously, that's huge. That's much, much bigger than I think the consensus is that Durham will bring. It would be nice if you at least find a few process crimes in the midst of everything. But
Right.
yeah, it's hard to say Durham's going to make a big case at the FBI right now.
Yeah, and I'm just saying that if that's the avenue he wanted to go, the first thing he'd have to do is prove that crimes were committed by the Hillary campaign that they covered up.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of goes back to something I mentioned earlier. I mean, they're in their roles as government agents, and you have to overcome a presumption of good faith efforts on their behalf. So information came to them. The information we know now is fabricated, and yes, they're very much overzealous in their pursuit of some of these allegations. And I think I'm ripping off something Ship said the other day in this, but yeah, if you want to pursue them criminally, you have to say, okay, they weren't just overzealous. Like there's a criminal aspect of why they overlooked this piece of evidence or why they took this action. And based on, the time that's elapsed, I mean, getting text messages and testimony from witnesses that are going to have really unreliable memories. I mean, it's just going to be incredibly hard to make a case. Now, if there's something in documentation, yeah, maybe Durham can make a case on a few people.
Right. All right. Well, I just wanted to throw that out. I mean, people were asking why Durham hasn't gone after some of the bad actors from that side. And that was just my take on it. But
Yeah.
I'll sign off.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, we'll see what happens. You could be
Yeah.
right. It could go that way. We'll see.
All right.
Alrighty. Let's see. Trying to get it to everybody new at least once before I go around to people for the second time. Julie. What's up, Julie? Oops. Hey, Julie, you there?
Hey, Ryan, how's it going?
Pretty good. How are you?
Pretty good, pretty good. Thanks for letting me talk. Just have a couple of things I want to talk about. I've talked to a couple of the guys about this, and these are speculations. These are just hypotheses. I'm just, trying to figure things out. So, getting back to the genesis of when Crossfire Hurricane started, I think that really kicked in about March and of 2016. In September of 2015, we had a meeting between the New York Attorney General with that Christopher Steele arranged. And that meeting included Bruce Orr and some FBI agents and another gentleman. And from that meeting, go forward to March, we had a lot of activity. You had both Carter Page and Felix, who worked with the New York Attorney General on a case, join the Trump campaign, which is extremely unusual, and no one is talking about that. So,
well,
let me just continue before you cut me off. But so in March of 2016, we really got started with Crossfire Hurricane. Going from today and working backwards, we have found more information out. We have found out that Joffe walked in the door with the Alpha Bank, and he was a government employee with a lot of fancy designations after his name. So when everyone is saying now, we believed what he brought us, they probably did. And they probably thought that a lot of the stuff that they were getting from Steele was the horseshit that it was. So when Joffe walked in the stuff, they really got excited. But the first thing they did was they took it to the FBI. So that's not really obfuscating or trying to hide something. That's, seriously trying to investigate some information that they received from someone who worked for the government. So this notion that they didn't know who the client was baffles me, because the guy worked for the government. How did he get the information to give to them? How did Joffe walk into the door? That's my question. But the same thing applies to Steele. Steele walked in the door also with a dossier. Now, I'm not saying that there wasn't a whole bunch of things that did not happen that could probably be questioned to be a lot of felonies after they got this information. That's postpartum, the way I look at it. Like, sort of like after the fruit of the poisonous tree. You can't walk in and hand someone a bunch of crap and then sit back and say, well, you lied about them not being your client. If that is the only issue that's being litigated right now, prosecuted, it is so weak. I don't understand that at all. For him to get on the phone and say to Baker, I want to come see you about this information I just got, it's not about a client, it's me coming to you, could have been very true. I mean, for the first time, they had somebody with bona fides behind their name with this complex information about server in a building communicating with a bank in Russia and being a back channel supported everything that they assumed was going to be correct in the Steele dossier that turned out to be a bunch of crap. So he might have just said, well, I want to take it to them and not have them think that it was political. That's the way I'm looking at it. But I have all these questions about why two government agents, Steele and Joffe, and they both worked, excuse me just a second. They both they both worked for the government. Steele worked for the government and Joffe worked for the government. So I also think that back in September, when they originally had their first meeting in September of 15, that was when the Republicans were funding it. And then in March of 16, it flipped. And I'm thinking to myself, that is when it became apparent that, and this again is speculation, Ryan, it became apparent that Trump was going to take the nomination and it wasn't going to be Bush. So I'm doing my little what ifs, what if then scenarios. They flipped it to take it to the Clinton camp, right? This is a little bit out there, to get two birds with one stone. They assumed that Clinton would win, but then they could have something on her if she bit the apple that she did, or their team did. The campaign, with all the ancillary things that have come up that y'all are wisely or, accurately stating could necessarily be considered, not legal things that occurred. And, but that all occurred after they were taken this information from two government sources. So I'll just leave it there. But I think that they're going to have a big problem having a successful prosecution on a lying charge because the person who brought them the information worked for the government and they already knew that they represented the campaign. So I think the just the fact that they could tell the jury, if it did get to a jury, that we believed them, we had no reason not to believe them, and we went to the government to report it. I don't think that it's going to be successful. And that's all I want to say for the lying charge. But and like you, we're all waiting to see, everything else that y'all have been discussing, the cover-ups on everybody's part, who participated in what. That all needs to come out. This is much bigger than Watergate, and it's all being buried, and it looks like it's all going to be swept under the rug, and that's kind of concerning to me. So that's all I wanted to say. And if you have any, comments, I'd appreciate it.
Yeah, so there's a few things I have to address, and that I don't want anybody to be confused because there's some things that were speculative, and then there's some things that were a little bit inaccurate. So I have to address a few things. So Steele was around in September 2015, but it wasn't related to anything related to Russiagate whatsoever. He was doing some work with Oleg Deripaska. Steele he had other clients. He had other interests that he was pursuing. So that's not, shouldn't make any leaps there.
I worked in litigation for a long time, and the first thing we did was put our timelines together.
Sorry, I just want to go through this a little bit. So, Steele being around is not anything to be concerned about. As far as we know, Steele was not hired by Fusion GPS until I think it was June 2016, and that's accurate. So we don't have to look at that anymore. Steele's not working for the federal government. Joffe is not really working for the government. Now, he might have some ties that we find out about, but he was employed by New Star. He had ownership interest in various companies, and he had contracts with the government, but he was not employed by the government. Crossfire Hurricane did not start in March 2016. The investigation started at the end of July. Steele dossier first report arrived on their desk July 5th. That was after discussing it with Victoria Newland. They got authorization with Steele to meet with Michael Gaeta, was the FBI agent, and that's when the reports started filtering into the FBI. So, March, there might be some activity in March, but there's nothing related to Crossfire Hurricane. As relates to, I think, Carter Page and some of the others that you pointed out, Carter Page was under investigation by April, I believe, but that was not related to Russiagate. So Carter Page had a history of cooperating with the FBI, but he also had a history, with the CIA as well. But there's a particular case out there, and Carter Page was helping with that. And for whatever reason, I don't really know the nexus of it. Carter Page was put under investigation in April. Again, not related to Russiagate. Anything else happening in March? There's really no evidence that related to Russiagate. As relates to Sussman later on, and whether or not the government knew about Joffe, there's no indication that the government knew Joffe was the source of these allegations. Now, there was a filing a few weeks ago where Durham noted that Joffe had sent or exchanged, and through his companies had exchanged hundreds of emails with the FBI during 2016. We don't have the context. We don't know if that's like his day-to-day operations with his companies. We don't know if maybe he slipped in some allegations around some of these, alpha ping server type stuff. I don't know. But we can't make any speculative leaps there. As far as we know, they knew Sussman had come to them with allegations. Sussman did not name a client. He claimed there was no client. And as far as we know, the FBI was completely unaware Joffe being the client. And obviously that would be material, right? If they had known that, a lot of things would have been different. So sorry to jump into that. Always interesting to get different perspectives, but we just want to be really cautious and clear on the known facts, and especially at this point, this late in the game, we want to be really cautious about speculation. So thank you for the comments. I appreciate it. Let's see who else we have. Hey, let's go to Durham, right? Got to go to Durham after all that. So there you go, Durham. What's up, man? Durham, you there?
Just typing up a report.
Uh-oh. It's indicting somebody.
Yeah, you guys are funny. Hey, I got a couple questions for King. If the judge reviews the contested material in camera and then he determines that it is not privileged, what happens next?
He releases it to Durham.
Okay, and then Durham and Sussman's attorneys argue over admissibility in this case?
Yes.
Got it. And then does that then cue Durham up to pierce similar claims of privilege in other indictments that he's maybe pursuing?
It's hard to say. We don't know what's in those documents.
Right. I think we can all agree there's probably something in those documents, right?
Yeah, I presume there is.
It's been a hell of a fight so far.
Yeah.
So, okay, thank you.
Assuming, let's say the privilege claim is not valid, and they get released to Durham, is Durham then free to use them in any sort of filing that he wishes in this case? So,
well, his first decision as to whether to put them into evidence at this trial.
So if Durham decides to put them into a filing, we'll have access to them, in other words.
Yeah, if he uses them as evidence in this trial, they'll be public. He may not decide that they're that relevant in this case, but he could easily refer to, the next indictment could contain the references.
Hey, one other thing that's popping up to mind. I know that obviously Sussman wants to get this over with. They want to have the speedy trial and all that stuff. But do you think, given the fact that Durham's he's put this stuff out sort of at the last minute here, and they're all arguing over that, if they pierce this privilege, do you think that even though they want the speedy trial, the Sussman's team might be inclined to ask for a continuance or to extend it, which ultimately I think would work in Durham's favor because he could then, use these filings to continue to educate the public.
No, I don't see Sussman pushing the trial back. If he did, he would be risking a superseding indictment for conspiracy.
Got it.
Hey, that one guy. What's up, man?
Hey guys, how's everybody doing tonight?
Pretty good. How are you?
Can't complain. Appreciate the chance to speak. I'll try to keep this brief. I just have a couple comments and would like to pose some questions on the current privilege argument issue. I see Ship is here now, and I'm hoping he and King will indulge me for a bit as I only have a civil litigator background. When I think of arguing against privilege in this case as the first stepping stone towards proving a criminal conspiracy, the crime fraud exception is the elephant in the room when dealing with a co-conspirator. But the bulk of ink spilled in these briefings is dedicated to whether privilege has been waived based on the public nature and dissemination of the work. Durham gives a brief reference on how crime fraud exception overcomes any privilege on page 5 of his brief. Which piqued my interest, and I'd love to see him raise it in his reply. But towards my questions, if Durham doesn't raise the crime fraud exception, do you think it's because the privilege is held by Clinton campaign, the DNC, and Jaffe, and Durham isn't comfortable extending the conspiracy to them at this point? Or could it be a more benign explanation, such as Durham just doesn't think he needs these emails for the conviction? Because I think King mentioned earlier he could just submit a witness declaration from Fusion to destroy their arguments.
I'll start. Shep, you want to take a crack at that?
Well, I haven't, frankly, I haven't read the pleadings. I've got other stuff that I'm doing, believe it or not, for January 6th defendants. So I haven't been able to sort of invest the kind of time I would probably need to read these arguments back and forth on the scope of the privilege. But off the top of my head, Durham could have fought these privilege battles at the time the grand jury was still meeting and considering. And everybody should understand the Sussman grand jury might still be meeting and might still be hearing evidence, and there might still be a superseding indictment in the works. And that can come down, 2 weeks before trial, 3 weeks before trial. It happens. It's not unheard of. And Durham's excuse would be, I've been battling to get these additional records, and these additional records turned out to be necessary to make the broader case. But he was able to bring, he had a statute problem on this particular False Claims Act. He was able to bring it based on the evidence that he had, and he's chosen to fight for these records in this case rather than in a separate, fight before Judge Howell, the presiding judge, for access by the grand jury. He's simply subpoenaed these records for this trial and is now, fighting off attorney-client privilege claims. And I think his basic argument is it's not a crime fraud exception because he can't yet prove that these documents are part of a crime, or he doesn't want to front that out yet. He does not want to front out the evidence that he has that there's a broader criminal conspiracy here that
penetrates or obviates the attorney-client privilege under the crime fraud exception. He could do all of that behind closed doors in sealed proceedings on behalf of the grand jury, but he's chosen to do it out in the open. And if he were to argue crime fraud exception now, he would have to front out his evidence that he has at this point of a broader criminal conspiracy. And so little of this, I think, is tactical. He doesn't likely need it for the trial as it stands now, the single count false statement. But if he gets his hands on it, which I think he fully expects to, I think he fully expects to win these claims. Now, there's an interesting question there, though. I mean, let me digress for just a moment. Let's assume that Judge Cooper rules in his favor and orders the documents be produced. The Clinton campaign and the DNC and whoever else, Perkins Coie, whoever else has filed these motions, they're going straight to the D.C. Circuit. They're going to appeal, which they can. And that right there could very well be justification to continue the case, to not have the trial next month. Judge Cooper, or the government could, or these parties could go to the appeals court, appeal any disclosure order, and then Durham could throw up his hands and say, I really need to have this evidence as part of the trial, and the court has ruled that the documents are not covered by the attorney-client privilege, and the defendant, and the third parties are now taking that up to the appellate court. So, our hands are tied. We need to vacate the trial date, move the trial off 6 months in the interest of justice. I could see that happening very easily, and Durham goes on doing what he's doing. One of the reasons why I credit the idea that Durham has significantly more in mind than he has done so far is I do not believe that John Durham, with his history, is the kind of guy, the diligent public servant, a guy who's been a prosecutor for 35 years, would be tying up the careers of 6 other people just for a couple of process crimes and a report. Because he's got 6 prosecutors working with him on this exercise, as well as who knows how many investigators and support staff. And I think they would all look at each other and have some not very happy reactions if Durham said, "Oh, well, we're just going to write a report and call it a day." Yeah, it's a lot of hours spent, on a serious, complicated endeavor, and then say, well, we'll put it all in a book form that some people might want to read, but otherwise, I'm retiring and heading for the Bahamas. So I think Durham doesn't need these documents for the 1 count false statement. He doesn't know what's in them, though. He doesn't know where they will take him. But I'm certain that he has got more than one cooperator. I think we know about this. The guy's name Dagon. We know he's been given immunity. But I'm certain there's more than that. I'm certain that there are some witnesses that the special counsel went to and said, you're only a witness. We don't view you as a target. We don't view you in any way as a potential defendant. You're only a witness. Please, we're going to call you before the grand jury and tell you what we know without having to immunize them. I mean, that's done all the time. So, again, same thing I've said many times. Durham knows so much more than any of us know. And he knows exactly where he's going. And I don't think he's just headed for an off-ramp.
I have a quick follow-up question, if you guys don't mind. Regardless of the outcome of this discovery dispute, based on what you said, is it possible that Durham convicting Sussman could be the key to unlocking privileged documents then moving forward, based on a crime fraud exception for trying to indict or prosecute other co-conspirators?
Well, but a 1001 conviction of Sussman for making a material misrepresentation about who his client was, that's the only crime you prove. The crime fraud exception requires you to front out the evidence of the crime that involves the communications. So, for example, I'll give you an example where this came up, and this was done out of view for the most part. But the Mueller Special Counsel's office in prosecuting, it was the General Flynn's business partner, the two Turkish guys. One of them never came back into the country, and the other one was convicted. They invoked the crime fraud exception there to pursue the defendant's records from his from the law firm representing the defendant, and they put his law firm through hell. And by asserting the crime fraud, the law firm had to assert the attorney-client privilege on behalf of the client, and then the law firm had to produce a bunch of records to the judge, and lawyers in the firm had to testify, and it was a long, drawn-out process. And the judge ultimately ended up ordering your finding the crime fraud exception applied, and gave up all those records. Embarrassing for the law firm, difficult for the law firm, expensive for the law firm. Law firms don't like to go through it if they don't want to go through it. So Perkins Coie, I think, has been cooperating here, but Perkins Coie had to look at certain records and confer with its clients about whether the clients wanted to assert the privilege as to those records. Now, Durham doesn't know what's in them. He doesn't necessarily know where they're going to take him, but I think he's mostly intrigued by, if I'm looking at this as a prosecutor, I'm looking at the date of the communications, the parties to the communications, and what else I know was happening in that specific time frame, based upon what people have told me, in testimony or interviews. And now I can guess about what's in that email, or one of the two people that sent or received the email can tell me that I remember getting an email that said XYZ. So I know it's there, but until I get past the privilege, I can't use it.
Hey, Ship, I got a question for you. I think the other day I heard you kind of speculating that Durham delaying trying to pierce this privilege was potentially strategic, that he had sort of a plan to wait, and you still think that that's a possibility?
Yeah, there's no, it may have, he may have just been, pressed for time, in the sense that he had to indict by September 16th. COVID cost him a lot of time. He didn't get started until 2.5, 3 years after the fact for some of these activities, so he didn't have a lot of time on the clock. So he may have had no choice when it comes down to actually filing the case. And then the decision becomes: do we fight for these records as part of a grand jury investigation where we rely on Judge Howell, or do we subpoena these records in the Sussman case and fight them out in open court with Judge Cooper? And I think they made a decision to force the privilege, the parties asserting the privilege, to come forward in open court and explain to the world why Fusion GPS has a privilege to not disclose its communications with Jaffe. How does Fusion GPS have a privileged relationship with Jaffe? And there are other similar kinds of attenuated arguments that are being made, to try to keep these documents, from seeing the light of day.
Schiff, there's one, maybe, I don't know if you saw it, but in recent filings by Durham, he did announce that somebody associated with Fusion will be getting immunity. We all think that person is Laura Sego, who is in the middle of some of these communications.
Right. I did see that. I saw that, I listened to that I listened to the hearing on the public line, and I did not, it didn't dawn on me at the moment that there was that specific reference made to the meeting that Jaffe attended, and they had somebody who put Jaffe in the room, and then it came out later that that Siegel had testified at some point that she was the fourth member in that room. I guess Elias,
Yeah.
Sussman, Jaffe, and her were
She
four
she
people
could
in the room.
Yeah, she could put them together in the room, and she's also the author or recipient of some emails between Fusion and Jaffe.
Yeah. Now, she might not have, the same level of potential criminal exposure, but, any criminal exposure is enough for her to invoke her Fifth Amendment right. So they give her transactional immunity to compel her testimony.
And I think that she can probably blow up at least Fusion's privilege claim.
Yeah. And the other possible candidate in there is Bruce Orr's wife. You would think that she has been, by virtue of being Bruce Orr's wife, I would expect that she has been cooperative along the way, and she may have, she may have been given. I had this happen to a witness just, very recently that had been given use immunity, meaning that the what the witness actually said cannot be used against the witness, and then we went to trial, and the witness was still needed at trial, and then they gave the witness transactional immunity, because use immunity, you can still, if all you have is use immunity, you can still assert your Fifth Amendment right at trial as a witness. But generally, then what happens if you indicate you're going to do that? The government gives you transactional immunity, which basically says, okay, we're not going to prosecute you for any of this conduct. We're not only are we not going to use your words against you, we promise to never bring charges against you. So I don't know that decision has been made on behalf of Nellie Orr, but I'm certain that Nellie Orr was given use immunity, which means they wouldn't use her words against her. That's very common when you're trying to just gather information. That's also, you've seen the same thing is referred to in various places as a proffer agreement. Proffer agreement, use immunity, queen for a day, 3 descriptions of the same thing.
It's good stuff, guys. I will, let's go to Christopher. And you as a speaker, if you want to ask a question or have a comment, go ahead. Christopher, are you there?
Can you hear me?
Yeah. Hey, how's it
How
going?
you doing? I'm calling from New York City. I'm just a regular guy. I'm enjoying and listening, but this thing has got me obsessed. This whole thing. I saw on YouTube in 2018 a guy named Joe DeGenova. Maybe I know the lawyers probably know who he is, and he tells a story about the FBI hiring contractors in 2015. Okay, and there's nothing wrong with hiring contractors because you need them for work, but when they didn't need them anymore, the contractors continued spying and illegally surveilling. Were they illegally surveilling all the Republican candidates in 2015? And Mike Rogers shut it down in 2016. I want to know, who were those 2 contractors? If you could take a guess, an educated guess to the lawyers, who were those 2 contractors? Were? I think they were Fusion GPS and CrowdStrike. This is my opinion. And is Durham going to release them, or is he going to hold them for trial? I don't know the law, so I'm just asking: is he going to release those names? Because if those were those 2 contractors, Fusion GPS or CrowdStrike, or I'm going to throw another name in it, Ronnie Jaffe, I'm telling you now, it's going to blow this thing up. Okay, but they were spied on. All the Republican candidates were spied on, and the lucky sap, quote, Trump, won the nomination. But I truly believe they were all spied on. Whoever won was going to be stuck with Russian collusion. I'm just a simple guy, and I just want to know what you guys think about that.
Yeah, thanks for the question, Christopher. It's a good question. It's actually been a topic of conversation for a lot of us over the last few weeks, and we really don't have any names right now for the contractors. It's not going to be Fusion GPS. I don't think it would be CrowdStrike, but something like a New Star, which is Rodney Joffe, that's entirely plausible. And we don't have any information one way or the other. So
sorry to interrupt. Are these the 4 contractors that are mentioned in Judge Collier's FISA or FISC report?
That's right, because in 2017, the Collier wrote a report, but the names are redacted, so we still don't know who they are. I want to know who the hell they are.
Let me jump in here for a second. And this has been speculated about a lot, and as anybody who's worked in the government knows, it could be dozens or hundreds of firms, because there are a lot of firms that the government contracts with, especially on the tech side, especially in the defense sector. 702, these 702 searches that we're talking about, those cross over. Their intelligence, supposedly, but they're clearly abused, as found by Judge Collier, as found by Admiral Rogers. But it's done through NSA by a variety of agencies who have access to it. And the issue, as Judge Collier found, and as Christopher just raised, was contractors being given access through the FBI to submit 702 search requests and then getting back the search information. But I'm going to throw out the name of a company, and I'll describe the company a little bit. And this is how sort of my understanding of how these kinds of contracts sometimes get issued. There's a company called Korn Ferry. Many people might have heard of it. There's several companies like Korn Ferry. But generally what Korn Ferry does is Korn Ferry hires former government workers that have particular skill sets. And then it pays them a salary better than they were making for the government. And then turns those workers back and makes them contract workers for the government. It's simply the government outsources some of its needs to a group of workers with the skill set that they learned from the government. A lot of these are ex-military. They're military intelligence analysts. They're law enforcement intelligence analysts. They're people that have the technical expertise because they learned it working at NSA or CIA or somewhere else. Then they left the government salary structure, and they went into private business. So when I saw these allegations first, my first thought was, well, that's just somebody like Korn Ferry, who the government has a contract that it gives out to Korn Ferry, and Korn Ferry, to fulfill the contract, assigns 25 analysts to work on it. And there's a few companies like Korn Ferry where they're really just manpower, but they're a specialized technical expertise when a specific technical expertise is going to be needed to fulfill the requirements of the contract. The FBI does it a lot on their intelligence side. They obviously they can't do any real contracting on their criminal side, because you have to be a special agent. You have to have police powers and stuff like that to act as a criminal investigator on behalf of the United States government on the criminal side. But a lot of the stuff they do on the intelligence side can be done through contract workers. So I'm not saying Korn Ferry was one of those contractors, but it's generally going to be somebody more like that than a Fusion GPS, which is just a bunch of journalists running around trying to make more money than they made as journalists.
Okay, 2 more. The DNC hack. Was that I believe that was an inside job. There is no way. I saw something with Aaron Matei, I think his name is, and he broke a story about that. I want to know who are the people that did they set it up? Did Sussman set it up? Because he hired CrowdStrike. That's one question. And the second question is, if any of you guys know, Fusion GPS hired reporters. They're on their payroll. Are those names ever going to be released? Because I know one of them is this witch, Natasha Bertrand. I know she's one of them. And what will happen to these reporters when their names are released? That's all I got to say because I don't want to curse. Have a good night.
I think there's probably people on this call that know the first subject, the history of that first subject better than I do. The hack of the DNC. One thing that I read early on that I've never seen a persuasive response to was the 15 specialist, cyber specialist who said the download speed reflected in the metadata is consistent with downloading to a media device and not an internet hack. And I've never seen that rebutted. Now the problem is nobody's ever actually had the server that was supposedly hacked except CrowdStrike. But in the data, these experts said the speed at which this data was downloaded is a hardwired connection, like a thumb drive or something like that. It is not a download through a wireless network. That's about all I can add to that.
And the name of the reporters that are on Fusion GPS's payroll, could you speculate? Because I know who one of them is. I'll bet my life on it I know who one of them is.
Yeah, I think at some point it'll probably come out because that was obtained by grand jury subpoena of Fusion GPS's banking records. They were able by grand jury subpoena of the banking records to see what reporters were paid. And Bertrand very well could be one of them. She was relatively young.
Trust me.
She was relatively young. She didn't have any real experience, and all of a sudden she's getting red hot tips to publish that moved her from some obscure publication to Politico, and then wherever she's at now, or wherever she's at now from Politico. I can't remember the exact, but she is particularly she's a transcriber. She doesn't write anything that suggests she has any original thoughts. She only writes stuff that's basically being dictated to her.
And the last thing I want to say is, do you think? Look, the trial is going to be in Washington D.C. 96% of the people in Washington D.C. voted for Biden. Okay, let's be honest. It's either going to be a hung jury or an acquittal. Let's just be honest with it. Let's not play games with one another. That's what's going to happen. And that defense team is going to slip in the name Donald Trump, and it's going to trigger this jury because they can't stand him down there. So I'm just being, maybe it's my New York cynicism. He's not going to be convicted. It's just not going to happen in that. And it's just aggravating. We all know what went on. With common sense and a brain. And hung jury or acquittal. I'm sorry.
Well, we'll have to see if we get there. I'm not convinced yet we're going to get there. We'll see.
Thank you.
Thanks, Christopher. That's good stuff. Michael, going back to you. Hey, Michael, how's it going? All right, we'll come back to you, I think.
I think this happened before. Can you hear me now?
Yes. How's it going?
Yeah, pretty good. Yeah, there's interesting the comment that Christopher just made at the end about we know what's going to happen in D.C. And I totally agree with him. That's why I'm wondering, in this case, everything we know on it and, where it's going and now Durham throwing out the conspiracy word, how could this lead anywhere else but to sedition? Now, I'm familiar with treason in the trial of Burr, the Aaron Burr trial, so I'm not going to go down and saying treason, but certainly sedition almost fits the bill exactly. And if by any chance a new AG or something comes up, is there another forum that we can try the case in if it does lead to a sedition type trial? Go ahead. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I don't. Not a lawyer. I don't know if those guys want to comment on that or not, but I don't really necessarily see it going that direction.
How could it
You know,
not go that direction?
well, I hear a lot of people throw out terms like sedition and treason, and those statutes really aren't geared for this type of conduct. I mean, yes, it's criminal.
It's conspiracy to overthrow the government of the United States. It is. It's the president we're talking about. When he was sworn into office, he was the president. They conspired to get him thrown out of office, to overturn his administration.
If you want to wrap up a conspiracy charge, I think there's probably some stronger avenues to take a conspiracy case. I don't think you can prove that their intention was the overthrow of the government. I imagine there's some difficulties in a case like that. And, if they're going to do a conspiracy case, there's much simpler charges to bring. And, Durham's going to have, there's a whole host of predicate offenses and what to wrap under the umbrella of conspiracy. And I think Durham will choose something a little bit simpler and a little bit more straightforward and something that there's more case law on, quite honestly. So, I don't know if anybody else wants to jump in. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think I would probably just, I'm sympathetic to the view of how he characterized what the goal was. I think the goal actually was to try to force Trump to resign. After he won, initially the goal was just to beat him, to cripple his campaign such that Hillary would be assured of winning, which they were confident she would win when they started, but just to punch a few more holes below the waterline in his boat and take him down. After he won, I think the effort was to hamstring the administration from on the government side, and then to create so much controversy and unhappiness and dysfunction to simply bring about his resignation and Pence becoming president. I think that was the goal all along. I mean, they're just the press, the Democrats, and a substantial portion of the Republican establishment just all thought he was unfit to be president, regardless of how many voters voted for him. He was just unfit for the office.
I'll do you one better, Ship. Pre-election, I think you could argue that someone like Rodney Jaffe, just as much as I don't think he was or is a particular political person, but he's auditioning for a job. He's saying if what we think may be true ends up being true, that he was showing, here's what I can do, and this just happened to be the way he could do it and get a lot of attention and maybe get the job he wanted or whatever that ended up being. But that, in my mind, would be, Jaffe thought he was going to get a job in the Hillary White House. So, everyone thought Hillary was going to win, but there was also a lot of incentive to do these things just to show off in order to maybe get a better job.
Yeah, one of the reasons that Comey gave Horowitz for sitting on the Anthony Weiner laptop was that he didn't want to delegitimize the incoming Hillary Clinton administration. So, I mean, it's like, yeah, you could see there's an altruistic reason for that, but you can also see that it's a completely corrupt reason, but it goes right along with that.
All right, let's add Budsman. What's up, man?
Same charge he's brought against Sussman against Christopher Steele, just based on what's in the public record?
Well, to get a false statement case, I mean, Steele would have to make a false statement to like the FBI or something like that.
Well, who did Steele say he was working on behalf?
I don't recall. I don't remember seeing any glaring lies.
Yeah, was just acting as a good citizen, just like Sussman, right?
What's that?
Didn't he tell Gata he was just coming forward as a good citizen and hide the fact that he was working for Hillary?
I don't remember it being addressed.
Okay, well, it just occurred to me that the same line of attack Durham's taking on Sussman could be taken on Christopher Steele, or maybe that matter Alexander Downer.
Well,
Yeah,
Downer
but
reported it to his own Australian agencies, so I don't think that would be a case there. And then the Australian government forwarded the tip to our government.
No, that's not
So,
that's not the way it went down. But anyway, Downer went to the U.S. Embassy in London. Anyway, I was just curious about that.
yeah, I don't see anything around Downer as a false statement. That I don't recall anything specifically about Steele. If you want to send me a citation or like a link or something, I'll take a look.
Yeah, sure. And as far as the idea that the FBI opened the case based on Sussman's information, was that like a separate case, or was that like a part of Crossfire Hurricane?
Yeah, so it gets a little bit confusing. It's a little bit unclear about how much impact it had. So there's a couple pieces to it. I mean, they did proceed and actually within a couple days of this meeting that Sussman brought the allegations to Baker, there was an additional set of allegations brought forward that Sergei Milian had used this alpha server in some capacity. And then ultimately they opened a counterintelligence investigation into Sergei Milian, which lasted throughout October, as far as I know. So, both of those allegations together kind of influenced that, I imagine. As far as the set of allegations, Sussman's charged with influencing, from what I understand, they did undertake efforts to look at this data. By February 2017, the FBI had debunked it. So they did take investigative steps. I don't know if it was an open investigation for the Alpha server piece specifically, but it was certainly within the umbrella of Crossfire Hurricane.
Well, I wonder too if this would be a little more abstract, but if Durham would argue that Strzok's opening of Crossfire Hurricane July 31st was influenced by Robbie Mook's and other statements that, the hack that had just happened 11 days prior, the WikiLeaks, was, that Trump was somehow involved. And then he gets the Downer tip, and then that colors his view of what could have otherwise been an innocuous piece of information.
I don't think he's going to stack. What ifs on top of each other. I understand the premise of what you're suggesting, but it's hard to charge somebody like an FBI agent when the information came from Downer, and then Downer got it from Papadopoulos. Now, there's a little bit of a conflict about what Papadopoulos actually said. There's a huge conflict, and even as it was reported, I mean, there's no way that it should have had the impact of the FBI that it did if they would have actually analyzed what was said. So I don't think it really influenced their investigation. I think they're going to open one, and I think it's more related to the Steele dossier than it is the Downer tip, even, to be honest. So,
yeah, I agree. I've always liked Lee Smith's theory that Crossfire Hurricane is a reference to the Whoopi Goldberg movie Jumpin' Jack Flash from 1986 about a British spy on the run from the KGB. I think that explains that title pretty good. And I think we all know that Strzok knew about what Fusion was up to, even though he claims he didn't. But if Downer's going to try to show that the efforts of Fusion and Sussman sort of put this ball in motion that sort of rolled downhill in all the ways we know for years later. You know, it seems like getting at that predication would be a more direct route, since by the time Sussman came around, they were already investigating.
Well, Durham's already addressed predication, and this was back in December 2019, right after the IG Horowitz report came out, and he addressed it very specifically. He said, based on the information he had available at that time, he did not necessarily agree with the conclusions of IG Horowitz as it relates to predication. So Durham had information by that point. I know now that by early 2020, he had some information as it relates to Rodney Joffe and some other pieces. I don't know if he had that in December 2019. I don't know if that influences the statement that he made at all.
Well, I think that statement could be explained just by simply understanding that what Papadopoulos said was, gossip from Fox News, that Russia had Hillary's emails, which were different emails from the DNC emails. And so, Durham could have just been saying anyone should use common sense and realize that downer tip was worthless.
Well, somebody, I've seen some reporters try to split hairs on this, and some commentators there seem to suggest that Durham would, there's some conversation between Durham and IG Horowitz where Durham talked about maybe doing like a partial investigation or like a low level type investigation might be a more reasonable step. And then the media kind of ran with that when Durham released a statement in December. But I'm not convinced that Durham would split hairs like that and say, I don't agree with predication, and then say, well, okay, maybe they should have taken some investigative steps or whatever. I mean, they had the Steele dossier, and then, this tip comes in. So I don't think that's what Durham's really resting his head on at all. I think there's something that we don't know about that's much more significant that Durham has found. I don't know what that is, but I don't think it's going to be, splitting hairs over the Papadopoulos thing. I hope it's not that.
Perhaps Durham has evidence that Strzok and company had the dossier, knew what Fusion was up to, and that therefore the Papadopoulos downer tip was a paper predicate.
When you have the timeline of the whole events, so if I remember correctly, the Downer Papadopoulos meeting over drinks occurred in May of 2016. And if you look at May of 2016, it's after Guccifer had first, supposedly hacked, not Guccifer 2.0, just Guccifer, had hacked the DNC, and DNC had already experienced hacks. But it was before the identity of Guccifer 2.0 was even publicly known. Before that, Guccifer 2.0 had even been created or announced himself or whatever. But it's really conspicuous that Downer sat on his tip through May and June, and not until July 26th did he actually provide the tip to the FBI, which just so happens to be the exact same day that Brennan says that Hillary launched her campaign, to falsely accuse Trump of, colluding with Russia.
Sure. Well, I mean, does Downer really go to the U.S. Embassy first, or does he call his Democrat friends and they say, man, you should go to the U.S. Embassy? That's what I'm getting at with the timing. Could this Sussman type 1001 charge be applied to Steele or even to Downer?
It's the timing that's the issue. It's not necessarily, who Downer went to, or I guess why is the issue, but it's why was it July 26th that Downer decided to contact the FBI?
Well, because it was just a few days after the Robbie Mook.
It was a couple days after the WikiLeaks dumped the emails, and that's why Downer came forward. Now, the big caveat is, supposedly, allegedly, Papadopoulos had said that he'd gotten information that the Russians had Hillary's emails, and of course, as we know, that's not true. The WikiLeaks released the DNC emails, so there's a big discrepancy there. But Downer came forward and he's citing the release of those emails on WikiLeaks, and then he referenced, that conversation that Papadopoulos had supposedly mentioned the emails. So I don't want to go into that. I think we've talked about the emails quite a bit.
Well, could I make one last point about the emails, since there's been a lot of talk about it tonight? one thing that I
Sure.
think is always been interesting that Mueller in his report says that WikiLeaks didn't reach out to Guccifer 2.0 until after Guccifer 2.0 made himself public with his blog post and taking credit. But what's wrong about that is that in Guccifer 2.0's first blog post, he claimed he had already given all the emails to WikiLeaks. So right there in the Mueller report versus the Guccifer 2.0 website on WordPress, which is still available online, anyone can go look at it. There's a huge discrepancy that's never been explained. And, I think more important than the VIPS stuff that's easily explainable is that discrepancy that no one ever talks about.
If you believe Guccifer.
Well, but would he? So they have to believe that he lied, that I already gave all the emails to WikiLeaks. Then WikiLeaks contacts him, and then a month later, he really does give all the emails to WikiLeaks. I mean, that's sort of strange credibility.
Yeah, if all that's true.
I mean, that's the official story.
Right.
Yeah, but it's not necessarily true that he went to WikiLeaks. I mean, you're trusting a blog post of a hacker that put a whole bunch of shit up there. So I wouldn't put any confidence in that. I he could say anything. Don't know that's true.
Well, great discussion tonight. Thanks, guys.
Yeah, thank you. All right, guys. I think I'm going to take one more question, and then I might wrap this one up. I might do a few minutes tomorrow night. I'm not going to do a long chat tomorrow night, but there is something coming out tomorrow that's going to be pretty significant, and people might have questions on it. They might want to talk about it. So I might do a chat. It's going to be pretty impromptu if I decide to do it, but probably at like 6 p.m. Eastern. I'm definitely not going to go past 7 p.m. Eastern because I got plans tomorrow night. But there will be a pretty significant story from Margot Cleveland tomorrow, so everybody should check that out in the morning. Let's go to We the People. How's it going? What's up, man? We the People, you there?
Can I jump in?
Yeah. Hey, Willie. What's up, man?
Yeah, no, so just a bit of housekeeping. Like if you're on a phone call to, like if you're listening on a phone to a federal court thing, don't record it. There's going to be like 16 of us making notes. We'll work it all out, and then we'll wait 24 hours until we get the transcript. I think there's one up on court listener for yesterday, but just generally don't do it. It's very illegal, possibly. So that's a bit of housekeeping. But then, I had a load of other stuff. And I really appreciate. First thing, or second thing, is I really appreciate everything that Ryan and everybody else on this chat is doing, especially Ryan, Margot, like the FOIAs which are coming out of Georgia Tech are just like they're mind blowing, really. Coupled that with what Durham is speaking in his indictments, or what we heard yesterday. I think I posted up on the chat. I tried to do a little bit of a diagram, but the major part of yesterday is that Joffe, or Rodney Joffe, was the instigator of the concept of the DNS, like linking Alpha Bank and Trump hotels or whatever. I forget the domain name. He went to Perkins Coie, his lawyers, and they seem to have chatted to. Excuse that sound. That's my dog next to me. They seem to have chatted to Mark Elias and the HFA, Hillary for America, or whatever it's called, campaign, and that Mark Elias, that slightly fatter Brian Stelter, encouraged Joffe to then get the Georgia Tech guys. I'm just going to call them the Greeks because they're mainly Greeks, to investigate and produce 3 white papers, which came out, and 2 of them, I forget the first one. Oh, one of them was Fusion GPS. One of them was Joffe and Sussman, and a third one, which is Dagon. The Dagon one is the one which we're probably going to have Dagon as an actual witness in this. But the big thing about yesterday was that the meeting between the meeting between Joffe and Elias was observed by this lady called Laura Seago, and that's quite obvious in the filings, that the privilege filings, that Fusion GPS like submitted, because they only mention one of their employees all the way through, and that's Laura Seago. So Laura Seago saw everything. She saw the meeting between Elias and Joffe and Hillary for Action, or whatever it is, HFA. So i.e. Podesta, who they've said, oh, we're not really interested in this, but they are, I want to say balls deep, but I don't want to say balls deep when I'm talking about Podesta. I'm sorry.
I think you already said it, though.
Yeah, okay, right. I'm sorry, but yeah, no. So, but this this is the major thing about yesterday, was like, but Laura Seago is the Fusion GPS employee who has this trial immunity. They've got Dagon in this, and this is just in the Sussman thing. This isn't beyond any conspiracy or whatever. That's for a different thing. We haven't even had the Danchenko in EVDA. There's no charges being brought on Joffe, and all the privilege is about the fight when we had 70 lawyers arrive like 2 days ago. It's over 38 emails out of about 7,000. So this is like this is the little like piton in the crack, just being hammered away, and that's the way I see it anyway. So, and yeah, don't record federal trial things, please, because we'll get there. But I wouldn't want for them to go to court and say, oh, somebody recorded it, we have to stop public access. If that makes sense. And I'm going to stop now. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Willie. It's good stuff. I appreciate your comments. I just tried to contribute. So glad everybody is able to kind of join us here, and yeah, we'll see what else I get, but just tried to contribute a little bit, and I appreciate those comments. So,
quick question: Does Margot's piece tomorrow have something to do with the FOIA tweet you had this morning? I think it was this morning, possibly yesterday.
yeah, I'm not going to preview her piece or anything. I did get a large batch of FOIA documents. The grand jury subpoena was not related to anything that's coming out tomorrow. But yeah, I did get more stuff, and I did collaborate with her, and yeah, it's going to be a really interesting piece tomorrow. I think it usually hits the Federalist right around 8 o'clock in the morning Eastern time, and definitely everybody should be watching for that. Like it, share it, tweet it out. It's gonna be pretty important. So, Fool Nelson, what's up, man?
What's up? What's up? What's up? Can you hear me?
What are you up to tonight?
All right, my headphones work. Sick. Well, I just had a big wiffle ball game.
Nice.
I hit a home run and I hit 91 miles per hour on the radar gun, so I'm feeling good about myself. In a 20-mile-per-hour headwind.
You pitched 91 miles an hour with a wiffle ball?
Yeah, I got a good arm. Not gonna lie.
Dude, that's pretty legit.
Oh, thanks, bro. So unfortunately on Thursdays I have this wiffle ball league. So I can't always come in, but
see, I think I chose Thursday nights because you were going to be free in the wintertime. So
yeah, now I picked up something else, but it doesn't even matter anymore since you're handling this so well that I don't have to be here anymore. Which I like.
It's always a brighter experience when you're here, Fool. So
I like to hear that. Good or bad? Good or bad?
Yeah.
All right, what are we discussing?
I think we're pretty much just riffing here. I was starting to wrap it up, but yeah, we can talk about anything you want to talk about.
Oh, sweet. Let's pop some Red Bulls.
There you go.
Staying up till 2 p.m.
Let's start talking about DNS.
Western.
Let's put people to sleep.
Western. Pacific time. Well, I just heard you guys talking about Margot's piece, and I think I know a little bit what's going on there, so could be cool.
Yeah, it's gonna be a cool piece, right? You would say?
Yeah, it's gonna be good.
Yeah,
it's gonna be good.
There you go, guys. Got enough teas for you to one night.
What are we allowed to talk about on this one?
I don't think I was going to cover anything else in that FOIA release. There are some other interesting pieces I don't think she's covering, but I'll probably just dump all those files out tomorrow and kind of let people dig through them.
Yeah, have you guys been talking about how garbage DARPA is? Or this entire private, public, stupid relationship?
Yeah, I mean, we didn't even really get into that. We talked more about the filings in the Sussman case.
Oh, yeah, okay.
So, but yeah, we can talk about DARPA.
All of those.
But that Margot, like that, like whatever she wrote today. I've been looking at that April, 2018 email, like back and forth. I want to know who Tim is now. It was Rodney and Tim.
Tim Furman. Tim from Domain Tools.
Domain Tools, yeah.
Okay, right. So, but that's this is like a whole nother level of things we're going to go down. And no, I've been staring while I've been listening to this chat. I've been making like AVIs for people, but also looking at Margot's piece, and it's amazing.
Which email? What about Tim? Which one was that?
I don't know because I moved out of my office into my shed and I can't look, but it's the one.
Come on,
Margot's Federalist.
I thought I read that one and I don't remember seeing Tim somewhere.
No, it says it's the It definitely has Tim in there,
Okay.
Rodney and Tim.
Yeah. So like
it's
early on, even like in 2016, like for that proof of concept venture, it seemed like it was Domain Tools and Newstar providing all the data. And Tim, I forget his last name. Domain Tools is huge, but they're providing a lot of the data. And then like for the Ramnesia project, like they're buying, like Georgia Tech was buying all the data from Newstar, Domain Tools, like Spam House, and this other company that I forget. But it seemed like.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
and we haven't even like scraped what Ramnesia means in Greek. It's like the goddess of retribution or something. It's
it could just be like attribution too, but
maybe okay. Ino, which is Greek for it is all Greek to me. So,
likewise.
But yeah, no, but that's the next like vein to like mine, I guess, and I don't know how far Durham's gone down this. We hope that he's gone all the way down, but I think that. Well,
I feel like he's sending like some like cheeky signals that he's farther down the line than anybody imagines. But
yeah, no, I understand that, but I just think that everybody listening here, I think not anybody who's digging should appreciate that. I don't think that we would have been here without all your efforts. So there we go.
Hey, on that note, hey Ryan, is there anything that you need help with, like people to look through documents or do other FOIAs? You've been doing so much stuff; it's really awesome. You need help with anything?
Yeah, but it's hard to coordinate. It's I put in a lot of FOIAs. I do have some more FOIAs to put in. I'd like to. I think somebody volunteered to put in a FOIA that lives in Alabama, but I want a FOIA Alabama for Project Birmingham related to Mikey Dickerson. I want to see if there's any investigations done into that. I don't think there was, but I want to make sure. Yeah, there's always opportunities to do more FOIAs, and as much as anything, I'd like to see people just kind of get motivated to look into it and kind of do FOIAs too, because there's a lot of things I miss. People taking a second look at documents and coming up with a plan to FOIA stuff is much stronger than me telling or asking for help. There's a few strategies that I use. So I go through the FOIA documents that I get or others that get, and then I look at everybody that's CC'd on the email, and then I Google them, and I actually maintain a spreadsheet, and I write down their email addresses, and then after I Google them, I write descriptions, who they are, what they're doing, and then I never know when that's going to come back around to being relevant. But generally speaking, as soon as I see somebody CC'd, I'm asking a couple questions. I'm asking, who are they? Is information publicly available? Is there a FOIA that's available to me if I want to just put one in? And if there is, usually I'm going ahead and putting in a FOIA. So, I appreciate the offer for help. I generally, as soon as I think of doing a FOIA, I just do it. But we need a lot more people looking at this. We need people in the media. We need more eyes. We need, we don't need 10 more sleuths. We need 1,000 more sleuths, and we need to inundate, agencies until we get to the bottom of this. Because I think there is information out there that's available that can be gotten And it just takes effort, and it just takes some legwork. And we'll see. I think a couple have been exploring opening up a fund to help fund some of the FOIAs and stuff. And I've been happy to shoulder some of the costs, but some of the costs are just prohibitive. Like, I've confirmed that Department of Homeland Security has 336 gigabytes of data, which is insane. Like, there's just no way I can even get them to break it down, and they're really slow in responding in the first place. So I don't even find out, get answers from them for like 2 months. So, maybe we might do some fundraising and try to mitigate some of those costs, which are outside of my realm, and that'll allow us to be a little bit more aggressive in what we pursue. So I appreciate the offer. I mean, I'll put some thought into it and see what else we can do. But yeah.
Awesome.
So just on the that amount of money to spend on FOIA or open access records. So I just posted a link from Margot again about geolocation. So the True the Vote people in Georgia, like we tried to, or some of us tried to get the Dropbox data just for video, but they've done something more. They've gone and done this thing called geolocation, and they've tracked the phones within like little hexagonal, like 6 foot diameter boxes or whatever, right? So specific locations. But they've had to pay a lot of money. I think they paid $2 million. And then the FOIA requests, or the open records requests, which were like knocked back like in November by friends of ours, who we all know, not and it was only after court records, court orders, but they suddenly produced them. So yeah, this FOIA thing is actually quite a big money drain. I don't know how you do it, like legally or with like a fund or whatever, 501c3 or whatever it's called. I forget what it's called. But yeah, there's a huge amount of data. There's a huge amount of data in Georgia Tech, which needs like delving through, and you need probably professionals doing it, which you want to pay. So yeah, I think this idea of funding more FOIA is great.
Yeah, I like that idea a lot. Hey, Ryan. Speaking of Georgia Tech, it seems like they've been especially responsive to your request. Is that something just because they're a university generally, or is it because they're in Georgia, or what's made them such a gold mine?
Yeah, it's the state of Georgia. They have really strict open records laws, which means like you can't really claim any exemptions over anything. Like everything's an open record. So they have really strict guidelines within their laws about how much time they have to respond on stuff. And yeah, Georgia Tech people are just awesome. So the dump of FOIA documents that I got a couple days ago is actually from the state of Georgia. So it's a little bit different. But in the FOIA documents that I was getting, I realized that the Attorney General Office of Georgia had some individual in some capacity representing Georgia Tech. So I FOIA'd that person and I got all their communications with the various lawyers and everything else in the case. And that yielded a treasure trove of documents that did not go through Georgia Tech and would not have been available through Georgia Tech. So that was important. They weren't quite as great as the people at Georgia Tech, but they still processed it within 3.5 weeks, which that's awesome. So
That makes me come up with an additional idea, which is number one: are there other states that have similarly strict laws in which we could pursue FOIAs relating to this matter that we're talking about? And then number two is, if people in the room, anyone else in the room, have any ideas in terms of Georgia, what else might be a possible subject for a FOIA in that state, or other ideas to FOIA for Georgia Tech, like certain names or anything else?
yeah, I mean it's a good question. There are some. Basically, all the states are going to process stuff a lot faster than the federal government, and federal government's going to process. They're going to approve a lot less, which is something that's horrible. In my experience, states will actually approve FOIAs, and they do process them just a lot faster. So you asked about other avenues for FOIAs. North Carolina, University of North Carolina, we're finding Fabian Monroe's has pretty close ties to our band of researchers. I'm not now. Don't take that as like an accusation that he's a part of it or culpable or anything. But from FOIA perspective, that doesn't necessarily matter. We just
he's
want to
a
get
sub. I mean, UNC's a sub awardee of the Ramnuja project, so I mean, you can definitely get FOIAs on that.
Yeah. Yeah, and I did get one FOIA on Fabian, and I didn't find too much interesting, so I didn't follow up with it for a while. And then one of the other sleuths that I talked to kind of had an idea, so I just FOIA'd them a week or two ago. So I should get documents back here in a couple more weeks. But yeah, like University of North Carolina and enhanced attribution, Ramnuja, stuff like that. That's fair game. Absolutely all day long, and not just Fabian, but probably any prominent cyber researcher there might be associated with programs, and that's kind of what I do. Like if there's a legitimate expectation that they might be associated with something, I just FOIA it. I mean, it's just I don't want to guess, so I did that. I have a FOIA in at the University of Michigan for a gentleman named Alex Halderman. And I don't even remember the basis of why I thought he was interesting, but he testified under the Select Committee for Intelligence or whatever on the security of elections in the wake of 2016. And when I FOIA'd them, they returned just a ton of records. Like I offered them my list of names, and basically this guy was in contact with Karamitis, Manos, Dagan, Matt Blaze, Susan Landau, Steve Belvin, and just on that basis alone, to process a FOIA was going to be $3,200, which just means like there's a massive number of records, which I was really surprised at. So I narrowed that down, way down. I'm going to get records here in a couple of weeks, but yeah, I don't know. I mean, he testified before the Senate based on basically saying, the Russians could have compromised these servers and stuff, and then all of a sudden he's in contact with like our researchers and Karamitis and stuff. So that's kind of interesting. Nick Feemster, I think is at the University of California. I put in a FOIA for him, but yeah, I mean, people could put more FOIAs there. I put in some FOIAs tonight for Cyber Protection Brigade, which is Army's cyber command. And basically, like, you have to develop strategies for how to do it. So basically, I just took like the commanding general, deputy commanding general, and a couple others, and I just like came up with a list. Like, hey, send me all the communications to and from Rodney Joffe and Angelos Karamitis and things of that nature. That's like my standard FOIA. That's my first FOIA, and then I'll do like a second FOIA, and I'll put in terms. So I'll put in, okay, now I don't want communications. Now I want search terms. I want any records relating to DNC hack or Ramnuja or enhanced attribution. So Army Cyber Command, I put in FOIAs there. People could probably follow up. DARPA has kind of been like my focus because I think there's a lot of bad shit that went on there. trying to get like an organization chart, like a good, clean organization chart would really help. I've got a bunch of FOIAs in there, but definitely people, like if you go through all my FOIA documents that I've released right now, just search for @DARPA.mil and whatever name it is, like just start putting in FOIAs for that person. That's a perfectly fine way to do research. If they're in an email and they're in the world of Monos and these guys, I would put in a FOIA and I would ask for all the emails to Monos and Joffe, and I always put in John Podesta just because I don't know, if there'll ever be a tie-in back to him, and I don't know. I go fishing a lot, and eventually, sometimes, 1 out of 100 trips, I might hook something. So that was a very
Ryan, I just want to say that like you've also inspired like tons of people to actually start doing this FOIA shit, because like Daniel and that smart Atomic Penguin guy, like I've never seen like just accounts inspired by any of the other FOIA guys. Like, I mean, FOIA fans been doing it for a while, but I've never seen like so many people just being like, all right, I just filed my first FOIA today. I'm like, hell yeah, let's go. Because I'm like, I will never write one of those. I'm glad somebody else is doing it. But I also want to say that like, it's crazy that like some of these Parmesan Patriot guys I was like in like a conversation, like some thread where they're just saying like, that you're like disinfo because you only FOIA Georgia Tech, where you should have been going after California, and Drexel and these other guys are on enhanced attribution. I'm like, there is, like you were saying, there's like no thread to even go look at that stuff. Like you basically follow the information that you have. Like where you, like for UNC, there's like obviously emails between Fabian and all these other and Manos and these guys, but like there's no, I mean, you can look up the California enhanced attribution stuff you want, but like thus far there's no real thread there. But it's like the Parmesan Patriots should file their own FOIAs if they're interested in that stuff. If anybody out there wants to go and file FOIAs, I'm all for it, but it's like, if they don't want it, like you've spent so much time here and they're talking shit about you, which is absolutely insane, which I can't even believe. And then they got you like banned on your first account. Absolutely insane. Like I can't believe some of those dudes, but it's whatever. Like they can have their PP fun, hashtag PP fun as much as they want, but you're doing real stuff. They're eating Hot Pockets in their basement, doing whatever.
Don't FOIA shame, right? You FOIA who you want to FOIA.
Yeah, exactly. Like if you're complaining about somebody not FOIAing the University of California, what the hell are you doing? Like you can type on your keyboard. I would never FOIA shame anybody.
Well, I appreciate that, Fool, and I have looked at some of those tweets that they have, and there are a couple angles that I was interested in exploring. Like I think the University of Southern California has a information technical school that Rodney Joffe is like a board member of or something like that. But they're a private entity. I can't FOIA them. So like that's the case for several of the entities that that group actually demands FOIAs of. They're not subject to FOIA. So,
yeah, like Drexel's a private university. It's like unbelievable. It's like I want to go FOIA packet forensics real quick. Oh, that's not gonna happen.
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate the comments though, and yeah, if anybody else is interested in putting in FOIAs, I mean, don't be afraid to do it. There's a lot of examples out there on the internet to do it. The fees are usually not that bad. If you run into a situation where the fees are extreme, you can narrow down your search, and you definitely should. You shouldn't, unless you're like a crazy right winger, you shouldn't spend hundreds of dollars in FOIAs to hunt down Russiagate stuff. But yeah, don't be afraid of it. Anybody has questions, always reach out. I try to get back to people when they ask FOIA questions. So
let me throw a hand grenade right now, even though it's late. Okay, so have you guys seen connections between Farsight and enhanced attribution? Or I know there are, but like anything interesting that's popped, because that was just something today that I DM'd some of that, but that's Vixie's company, and they're the biggest as I've seen. They're the biggest depository of passive DNS to put everyone to sleep database in the world, and so that's sort of like they're the 10,000-pound gorilla in the room. If there's not some connection, if there's not significant connections there, there's a reason why, and either way, it's interesting to me.
It's a good question. It's something I've been thinking about, but I haven't seen anything pop up yet. I might try FOIAing that in some way, but yeah, it is a little bit strange not to see Farsight kind of in the loop of any of these conversations, because they do have all that data, and even as it relates to the Alpha Bank pings, I think like the secondary set of data might have come through Newstar, but the first set, I think, the Alpha lawyers thought it came from Amsterdam Internet Exchange, which I think has an affiliation in Newstar too. So I don't know. I don't know if they didn't need the data from Farsight, or if there's, maybe Joffe didn't want to offend Vixie, or I have no idea. It's a good question though.
I mean, Domain Tools bought Farsight recently, but obviously, like they're all talking about how they brought the DNS logs or whatever to Vixie at some point in 2016 or whatever. It's almost like they wanted, since Vixie, I guess, is like one of the experts in DNS or whatever, it's almost like they wanted to keep it away from him at some point, but I feel like he's going to pop up. I can't even remember. I don't think I have seen Farsight at all in any of these emails. Mainly they're just buying data from Newstar and Domain Tools and these other places, but
See, that's crazy. Like
yeah.
Again, it's like Paul
Which I don't
Vixie
know
is
if there's like
yeah.
it's almost like there's like a relationship between Newstar, because it's Joffe like made Vixie basically. He introduced him to everybody and stuff like that back in the day. So there has to be some sort of relationship there, but I don't know. I was like searching to see like if Joffe basically had ownership interest in Farsight, but I couldn't pin that down because I think Farsight's like registered in Delaware or whatever, so you can't see that.
Right. It's almost like they're keeping arm's length, and that's interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, it could just be bad blood, or maybe they're intentionally doing it. I don't know, but it's just super interesting, because the more you dig in this stuff, the Farsight stuff's kind of, it's not unique, but it's different than the EA stuff, because okay, so Georgia Tech's setting up their own sniffers, they're soaking up all this data, but Farsight basically took over this network where they're asking all these DNS servers to install these sensors. That it's just a piece of software that you're reporting back so they can do research on hackers and whatever, and that's cool. So that's how they get all this crazy amount of data, but that's like this huge pool of data. So it's just it's very interesting that they wouldn't plumb those depths when they potentially had the opportunity, or maybe they did. But that's just kind of maybe it's a rabbit hole, but it just seems very interesting.
Yeah, it seems to me like there could be like a relationship between that and Zetalytics, because Zetalytics is kind of spooky, but there is definitely bad blood between Monos and Vixie, and I think Dagon and Vixie too, because there's emails even talking about that, where Vixie is basically apologizing for stuff he did back in the day, which I think was probably involved with Joffe too, because Joffe was talking about like how he's going to revolution. I don't even know what it was. Like, I can't talk about this very good, but he's like, I'm going to do this thing with DNS, and all these concerned nerds were very pissed off at him. He's like, I'm going to do it anyways, and he did it with Ultra DNS, whatever the hell it was, which I don't really understand. Which I feel like he might have taken Paul Vixie on that, and like Vixie was apologizing to Monos and other people probably. But yeah, there's some tension there, and it's like represented in emails, which Ryan got, of course.
Yeah, it's super deep nerd nonsense, but I think there's some good nuggets there that I mean, Vixie was like the Einstein of DNS, and I think there's probably just bad blood based on everyone's supposed to listen to him, and if you go off the reservation, you're gonna be disfavored maybe. And I think Joffe actually did something that was like, no, you should never do this, and it was successful, and maybe that caused bad blood because it's like, oh well, you crossed me and then you were successful, so I'm even more mad at you. I don't know. We're just all kind of riffing, but yeah, that it's just such a weird niche of tech that you could talk about forever, I guess.
I just want to jump in here. This is kind of a grenade also, but I'm wondering if what you guys know about ERP. I went down a complete rabbit hole today, and any of the incorporation filings, there's no name. Joffe's name is nowhere there. It's just people that I can't find any links to Joffe. I'm wondering if you guys have any more information on that.
Yeah, ERP Services is a subsidiary of Newstar that exclusively does business with the government. I think I did see those other names, but that's all Joffe. He's pretty much he ran that division, is my understanding. I think there are some other people involved, as you noted, but yeah.
And what about I think it's called Tagris. That's like another. I think it's one of the other Newstar subsidiaries. I think that was Newstar Information Services. I can't remember exactly.
Tagris?
I wonder if you guys know about that. Yeah, Tagris. That's if you guys haven't heard the name, that's something that's interesting to look at. It was part of my whole rabbit hole today, but that's something that has to do with. I'm just checking my notes. Tagris Information Corporation. That has something to do with Newstar, and that's I think, if I'm not mistaken, that has something to do with Newstar Information Services. So you guys might want to check that out too. Sorry, I think it's Targus, not Tagris.
Yeah, sorry, I was just Googling it.
Targus, yeah. And there's a lot of links with Newstar.
Yeah, I'll take a look at that. Yeah. I don't know if there's anything there to pull a thread on. It looks like that's more like caller ID type stuff.
I mean, there might be something there, but I mean, again, yeah, you'd probably have to pull a lot of threads to try to find anything. But just another question. I'm wondering if you guys have seen anything with China and the topic of IP theft, like intellectual property theft and patent infringements. I think there's something there, and I think patent infringements and with like Joffe's patents and just internet patents in general. I think there's a lot of cases that have to do with patent infringement. And I also found Sasha Oppelman when she wasn't married to Victor. She said in a court filing, or I think she was going to be part of a jury for a case, and she described what she did as she said her company was in the business of buying IPs, tech IPs. So I'm not really sure if there's something there, but there might be.
Yeah, if you want to DM me some of that stuff. I know you found that good case about.
Yeah, did you ever find anything about that?
Yeah, I ordered the case file.
Yeah.
Oh, Main Nerve, that's what it was.
Yeah,
you pointed out
exactly.
Main Nerve, so I know you find some good research. So yeah, if you want to DM me that, I haven't seen anything about Joffe having to defend any patents or anything like that.
No,
But
that was I think there is something there. I haven't found the link. I mean I just go down the rabbit hole and I get lost in something, but I think there is something with IP and IP infringement and also trademark infringement. I think there's something there.
okay.
I'm trying to find the link. I see hints of it, but I'm still looking.
Okay. Yeah, if you want to DM me, I'm happy to take a look. And as a quick update, I mean, I ordered that main nerve case file, so I'm getting all the documents, all the pleadings in that civil case, and that should be tomorrow. So I think by tomorrow night I'll be able to release that. So
that's awesome. Yeah, it should give us some more info on the early 2000s. A time we don't really know about. And
yeah,
I guess
well,
that's an early time with Joffe being in Phoenix or being in Arizona. So
well,
it's
I
something.
think
Yeah.
most importantly, I think it's going to relate to the origins of Bostrom, and it's
Yeah.
going to give us some really important history and context there. So it should be pretty interesting.
Yeah, definitely. I think there has to be something there, because I mean, they're involved. Lodgson and Janel's in there too, and he's everywhere with Joffe. So that'll be interesting to see.
Yeah, it's good stuff. We'll take a look at that. I'll definitely hat tip you when I release that.
Cool.
It's
Thanks,
good work.
man.
Yeah, thank you. JH, what's up, man?
Of course, when I spoke up, Twitter crashed, but I'm just now getting back in. But Alex Halderman wrote a report for the state of Georgia that was very critical of Dominion voting systems. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if that's really relevant here, but I found it sort of jaw-dropping that I think you mentioned that he was in contact with the people at Georgia Tech and everything.
Yeah, he's heavy contact with basically everybody.
Yeah.
But
so
yeah.
the report was apparently submitted, confidentially and everything. So I don't think the report has been made public, but there's been a lot of demands to make the report public. But aside from that, what I was going to say is that when submitting FOIA requests, which I'm sure you're very well aware of, but there's always at least two sides to every conversation. So if you meet dead ends on one side of the conversation, you can always hit the other side of the conversation and try to access it from that direction.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, just because you get a no doesn't mean you can't get a yes. So, definitely trying to work around and trying to find some creative ways to get to documents. It's always helpful. Glenn, I will take you. I don't know if you have a question or comment, and then I might wrap things up here. Hey, Glenn, how's it going?
Good. Appreciate y'all doing this. I was the thought occurs to me that it seems to me that he's got to be going after statements made to the Mueller team, with as a strategy, and that this is an intro to that. And I lost my connection for a while, so I apologize if that's been covered already. Whether it's false statements or conspiracy, but there was, I think maybe during the argument, special counsel said, this stuff was distributed throughout government. And I'm not sure where else that would have gone but to Mueller. And it strikes me that that may be, the next stage of it is going to statements that were made to Mueller, and in particular, it strikes me as odd that the FBI briefs the DNC on the problems with Russians hacks, and then they're setting up the Swift boat for Trump. And strangely enough, they get hacked by the Russians that they've already been warned about, or at least perhaps, who knows who did the hacks, but or at least some of the hacks. And I've got to wonder if that's the rabbit trail he's on, whether the original DNC hacks were good. I read a bunch of that stuff by, a bunch of the analysis of that, and it was kind of Greek to me, but seems to me that might be where he's going.
Ryan, before I wanted to get this thought out of my head before I forget it, but Glenn, you make it like a good point where you're talking about other, like they talk about other branches of government, and that's like Durham showing his hand basically, because Joffe's running this stuff into Congress and the Senate a lot, so that really pushes back statutes of limitations.
Exactly.
And I don't think Joffe. I mean, I don't think Durham would put that in their filings unless they're kind of showing their hand, being like, Joffe, Dan Jones, all these guys were running this stuff again, the same CIA stuff, probably the Yoda stuff and whatever into Congress. So they're very comfortable because we have like Lorenzen and Dagon working far into late 2017, basically, and those like subtle hints where you're just like, okay, I know what Durham's saying right there, where he's saying other executive or other branches of government.
Yeah, exactly on the statute stuff, and and I think
so. They're comfortable right now because they know there's acts far into 2017.
I'm with you completely. I used to practice law, and I did a bunch of Upjohn investigations. These guys are hosed on privilege. I mean, they're hosed on privilege. I mean, they're going to lose that stuff. There's going to be subject matter waiver unless this judge just screws up unbelievably badly. I mean, that's the sloppiest. I mean, I don't think it was ever remotely privileged in the first place. It looks like pure rote, language to attempt to throw up something with a shield, but I just don't think it's going to fly. I think the in camera is going to kill them.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the consensus of everybody. I mean, on the merits, they don't have anything to stand on. I mean, there's just no way they can make a privilege claim that's going to withhold scrutiny. I think a few lawyers have kind of postulated that the judge might dismiss it or might do something on procedural grounds with them bringing it to the trial judge and not pursuing recourse through the grand jury.
But then that would be a really oddly harsh remedy, because as the case progresses, at some point there's got to be a jump off. And I looked at that, and I didn't really delve into the DC or the particular rules there, but that would be an extraordinarily harsh remedy, and it wouldn't seem to contemplate once you're actually into a different case, and you don't discover that you need to attempt to compel purportedly privileged documents. I mean, there's got to be some kind of a timing issue there.
Yeah, I hope you're right. I think you're right, and hopefully we see a filing soon that the motion's granted, and the judge is going to do an in-camera review and take a look and evaluate the privilege claims. And I really expect once the judge does that, he's going to find these documents are not privileged at all. Durham's going to get a whole host of documents. I mean, I think there's 1,500 documents related to Fusion GPS that he wanted. I know there's a ton from Rodney Joffe we don't have a number on that he wants as well. So it's going to open up a treasure chest, I think, once this gets granted.
And hopefully, what I'm hoping is that that we wind up with some subject matter waiver, and we wind up looking at the Russian breach, and we get into the CrowdStrike stuff also, because that was set up purportedly to be for the purpose of providing legal advice and Upjohn investigation. But, then he selectively discloses parts of that investigation to the FBI, not to the rest. I mean, there's a lot of things that you could argue subject matter waiver and get at all that stuff too.
Yeah, that's That's a good point, and I'm just making a note myself because I'm actually in the process of appealing a FOIA on those CrowdStrike reports, and I recall now that they did get pushed into the media, so I don't know if they can. Maybe I can use that as an argument. So that's good stuff.
Or to the FBI, they were given to the FBI.
Yeah, it's a good point.
Appreciate y'all doing this.
Yeah, thank you. We're gonna.
And hey, I'm pretty familiar with all the FOIA free public information stuff, so I'm gonna start trying to chip in myself, man.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Citizen journalism. I mean, I was reading today. I can't help but laugh. CNN Plus, they spent $290 million and failed venture, and I spent $290 on this FOIA request. I'm gonna dump the files tomorrow, and they're important files. I mean, it's much more important than anything CNN just did. $290 million. So
yeah, I was going to say you probably are more value there than the entire network, not just CNN Plus.
Yeah, well, I mean, we have more listeners on this chat right now than CNN Plus had. So
yeah, awesome, man. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks. I hope you'll come back. We plan on continuing to do these. We've been doing them for 4 or 5 months, pretty regular now. And anytime there's a major event, we'll probably do one that night, and pretty regularly anyway. So
yeah, I just it's like one of those things. I figured I'll wait for Mueller, and then I happened to read an article that had the Steele dossier attached to it. Read that, and I went, "What the fuck?"
Yeah.
So anyway, I'm newer to it, but very enthusiastic about it now.
Yeah, I appreciate you joining us.
Will do.
I have a quick technical question to ask you. When you're submitting a FOIA request to, say, Georgia Tech, and you're interested in conversations that, say, Antonakakis had with DARPA, do you submit that to something like the General Counsel's office at Georgia Tech, or do you submit it to the state of Georgia? In other words, like, how specific do you have to be to the agency that you submit that request to?
Yeah, so Georgia Tech has an open records office, and you just submit through an email there. You identify the records or like the contacts that you're going to request records from. State of Georgia being what it is, like, you don't really need all that much information, and they're really, really nice people there, which is always nice. But yeah, I mean, I don't even include that much detail. I think 2 to 3 sentences, and I'm done. So you identify the records, you identify the time period. So I might do like April 1, 2016 through April 1, 2022, or something like that. Or if you want to narrow it down, I might do a couple years or a couple months. So
if you submit it to the wrong location, do you find that they just tell you the correct location to submit it to, or do you find that they often forward it for you?
Well, they have an obligation to forward it. Basically, any public record request in the state of Georgia to any official of an institution is treated as a valid submission. But I mean, there's a designated open records request, so you just send everything to one email address.
Yeah, and if you're not sure, one of the things you can do is just add a flag that says "Attention Freedom of Information Act officer" or "Attention Public Information Act, Open Records Act officer," something like that. That'll make it real clear that they've got a duty to get somebody that'll respond to it as a FOIA.
Yeah, that's a good point. I guess I always start my emails off with like "pursuant to open records laws of the state," or whatever they call it for that particular state or federal agency or whatever. It might be the Freedom of Information Act, might be Open Records Act, whatever it is.
Yeah, that'll do it.
Yep. Alrighty. Does anybody have anything else? I might. Yeah. Geez, 1:45. I got to work in the morning, so I'm gonna go ahead and end it here, guys.
Thank you.
I'm gonna try to keep doing these chats whenever I can. Look for Margot Cleveland's article tomorrow. That'll be important. And appreciate everybody coming tonight. Thank you to all our speakers who are all outstanding. And I'll see you next time. See you guys.
See you, man.
Bye. Thank you.
Thanks.